The toughest job is to call the room to order. Thank you, everybody, especially those coming in and finding your seats in a hurry. It's much appreciated. My name's Iain MacKenzie. I'm Chair of the Board for NHRA, and I'll look after you for the first part of this afternoon. After such a wonderful smoking ceremony, I'd like to welcome Cliffy Wilson to the stage, please, from Kaaru Cultural Services to officially welcome us to country. Thank you.
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. How are you? Going well? That's good. So we've got people from all over Australia, hey? Tasmania's in the house? There we go. A little bit late. They're too excited about the footy. They forgot they're here, I reckon. Queensland? There we go. NT? There we go. We've got one there. Victoria? Front door's that way. There we go. See you later. I'm just kidding. You ready for a state game, guys? It's going to be a good one. We're going to win, obviously. No, look, before I get on with the welcome to country, I do want to say it's an honour for me to stand up here to represent my family, Kaaru Cultural Services, which in the Kaurna language translates to One Blood. And through Kaaru Cultural Services, I was a part of the first generation of my family to be able to relearn the Kaurna language, connect back with the culture, and then over the years be invited to work into public schools and showcase some of that culture. Then also be invited to public forums like this to showcase some of that culture for you guys. So I really appreciate the platform you've given me today. But I do want to talk a little bit about the cleansing ceremony and why it's a practice thing here, not only on Kaurna country but all across Australia. The reason we do that is because it's a way that we believe that the ancestors that have gone on to the spiritual world can recognise the scent that we cover ourselves with, that blue bush that I was burning. Now, you go across to different countries, they might burn something different, but down here we burn some blue bush, which is found all along our coastal regions, and we burn for many thousands of years. So what that does is it marks the individual scent that we will have about us. You know, some of us might smell better than others, but we won't judge because we're all friends here today, okay? But look, we get that scent from our parents, and they get it from their parents, and so on and so forth, and it's passed down through generations. So we cover that scent so the ancestors in the spiritual world can recognise that scent while we're on country and keep us protected and help keep our spirit strong. But it was also a way to cleanse our spirit and make our spirit strong. If we were feeling a little bit sick or a little bit down, a cleansing ceremony was performed just to help reconnect with our spirit and keep us strong again. So I want to thank you for being a part of that cultural practice that's been practiced for many thousands of years. I really appreciate that. But I think since we're on the traditional lands of the Kaurna people, I should welcome you in my traditional language. So I want to start by saying, Nyanke Namena, Namani. Nana Cliffy Tunkel, Manacha Wilson. Nagana, Naranjeri, Naranga, Nadri, Arandamayu. Mariwachanga Gana Mirna, Nawangandi Mani Bunigana Yatana. Nacha Yukandalia Yakandalia, Nachalia. So to translate that, ladies and gentlemen, first I'd like to introduce myself. My name is Cliffy Wilson, but I also go by Tunkel and Manacha, which are both of my traditional names. So the first one, Tunkel, is my totem. So our totems can range from native plants and trees, native animals, or even some of the tools and artefacts that we've created over time. Our role in community is to become the protector of whatever that may be. So if you have an animal, which I do, we can't hunt it, we can't kill it, we can't eat it. If we see it sick or injured, we have to nurture it back to health. Now I say the old followers have thrown me under the bus and set me up with my totem name because it's the king brown snake, one of the most dangerous animals in the world. So I thank them for that. It's a good one. So, I'm just kidding. I like to have a bit of fun up here. But also Manacha is just my birth order name. So when a mother gives birth to a child, they're all given one. Manacha for me translates to the fourth born male of my family. My family are proud Kaurna people from here in the Adelaide Plains and also proud Ngarrindjeri people from the lower lakes of the Coorong. I do have strong family connection to the Narangga on the Yorke Peninsula, the Nudgee on the Flinders Ranges, and last but not least, Aranda people in the Northern Territory of Alice Springs. Once again, I'd like to welcome you here to the traditional lands of the Kaurna people. But this area here, the city of Adelaide, was known as Tandaganya to the Kaurna people. So this derives from two words in the Kaurna vocabulary, the first word being Tanda, which is a big red kangaroo, and is also the totem for the Kaurna people. It was a way to clothe us, feed us, but we also believe that the big red kangaroo gave us the man law down here that we abide by on Kaurna country. And the second half of that word is Ganya, which is the rock. Not Dwayne Johnson, the actor and wrestler, right? So just calm it down a bit, all right? But no, look, we had two significant stones in the Adelaide CBD, one where the convention centre is now, and also one in Victoria Square. Unfortunately, you won't see them now. They were quarried down to build the foundations for a lot of the churches and the buildings here in the CBD. But they were a way for the Kaurna people to recognise their cultural campsites and also their ceremonial grounds here around this area of the Adelaide CBD. So in saying that, may we pay respects to the cultural and spiritual beliefs of the Kaurna people, and also recognise that the ongoing connection to the land, the sky, and the waters that surround and connect us are still as strong, still as important, and last but not least, also very resourceful to the Kaurna people as well. Also, I want to pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging, and give a special thank you to the elders who paved the way for me to stand up here to speak my traditional language and welcome you not only to the traditional land of the Kaurna people, but a place that many people from many walks of life now call Wadley, a place many of us now call home. So in saying that, I do want to acknowledge the diversity we have not only in the city of Adelaide, but across the country of Australia, and pay respects to First Nations people across the world, and respect that your cultural and spiritual beliefs are still practiced and still important to you today as well. But before I get out of here, I would like to teach you all a couple of words, and if you can say them, that'd be awesome. So the first word I want to teach you is Nachalia. Can we say that one? Perfect. And the last word I want to teach you is Nakara. Can we say that one? Lovely. So Nachalia just means thank you in the Kaurna language. So I want to thank you, the audience, for your time and attention and respect while I've been up here talking. Also, thank you for being a part of the cleansing ceremony out there. I really appreciate that. To the staff and organisers of today's event, thank you for having me out here to represent the Kaurna community and give me this platform to be able to speak my language and showcase some culture today. I really appreciate that and I'm so grateful for it. And Nakara is our way of saying we'll see you again when our paths meet, because we never believed in goodbyes, not only down here in Kaurna country, but across the nation. Us as Aboriginal people, we thought we'd always see each other again, whether it was in this life or as we pass on into the spiritual world. So once again, Nakara means we'll see you again when our paths meet. So ladies and gentlemen, I hope you have a great day, and Nachalia and Nakara. See you later.
Cliffy, Nachalia, thank you very much. And I'm certainly hope our paths do cross. Thank you. Well, welcome to the third Natural Hazards Forum for Natural Hazards Research Australia, and a special welcome to those joining us online as well. I know there is a room in Brisbane packed with a bunch of academics as well. Looking forward to this. The event is sold out, and I'm going off script, but as I look around the room and see a full house, it's not just heartwarming and reassuring, but it means for me personally, I think the future of the nation is in good hands in terms of the research we need to conduct here. It's my great pleasure to introduce Mr Lee Odenwalder MP, Member for Elizabeth, who has kindly accepted to attend and officially open our Natural Hazards Research Forum here today, and doing so on behalf of the Minister for Police, Emergency Services and Correctional Services, the Honourable Dan Cragen MP. Mr Odenwalder, thank you.
Well, thank you very much for that kind introduction. My name is Lee Odenwalder. I first of all want to acknowledge and thank Cliffy Wilson actually for his welcome to the country, and acknowledge that we do meet today on the land of the Kaurna people, and I want to pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging. I want to acknowledge Professor Iain MacKenzie, the Chair of Natural Hazards Research Australia, Brendan Moon, of course, who we'll be hearing from later on, as Coordinator General of NEMA, and Andrew Gissing, the CEO of Natural Hazards Research Australia. I'm really pleased to be here representing Dan today, the Minister for Police. Firstly, I have a peripheral understanding of the landscape that you all, well, most of you work in. First of all, as a first responder, about 20 years ago as a police officer working in Elizabeth, and of course they have a particular role in the back end of emergency management. But I was also, between 2018 and 22, the Shadow Minister for Emergency Services. And so that gave me a pretty broad understanding of some of the issues you'll be discussing. That also, of course, coincided with the terrible bushfires we had here and around the country, of course, in 1920. And at that time, with all the inquiries that took place, both here and interstate, with the Royal Commission that was undertaken into natural disasters, I honestly thought that 2020 was going to be the year of emergency management. It was going to be all over the news every day, and that's all we'd be talking about, is how to mitigate hazards and address climate change. And then, of course, in March, COVID hit and pretty much dominated the rest of my time as a Shadow Minister in opposition. So there was an opportunity lost, I think. I don't know if people in the room would agree with me. There was a big opportunity lost at that time. But, of course, underneath the media and the government talk, the work was going on largely due to people in this room. Then in 2022, 70% of Australians lived in a local government area that was subject to a disaster. Extreme fire weather days have increased by 56% over the last 4 decades, and this is forecast to increase by a further 20% by 2030 and up to 40% by 2050. I'm sure I'll get some of these statistics wrong, and Brendan will let me know in short time. The current economic cost of disasters in Australia is around $38 billion a year, and that's forecast to reach something like $73 billion by 2060. And as the frequency and complexity of disasters continue to rise, we're presented with systemic challenges that demand enhanced cooperation between disciplines, between emergency management professionals, between researchers and, of course, the government. With the escalating nature of disasters, so too is the imperative to advance knowledge, data and understanding. But information about data risk does not on its own lead to risk reduction, of course. It must be accessible, it must be tailored and understood, and it must also be clear why this information is important to the decisions made by the end users. We need a broader recognition that disaster resilience is a shared responsibility for individuals, for businesses, for non-government organisations and communities, as well as for governments. Nationwide, the capacity of our emergency management sector, including our first responders, is under pressure, which is why, as leaders, we need to ensure that we're not just reacting to crises, but that we're being proactive. Approximately 93% of disaster funding is currently directed towards response and recovery. And this is simply not sustainable when every $1 invested at the other end in resilience and risk reduction can deliver around $15 in post-disaster recovery costs. Innovation focused on resilience and mitigation empowers us to have better outcomes in relation to modern-day disasters. This may be developing early warning systems for natural disasters or creating cutting-edge technologies and application of AI to enhance communication and coordination during emergencies. And research, of course, plays an equally vital role by providing the foundation upon which our contemporary emergency management practices are based. It's through rigorous scientific inquiry that researchers uncover new insights, identify emerging threats, and refine existing strategies. From studying the behaviour of natural phenomena to analysing the effectiveness of response tactics, research equips us with the knowledge needed to make informed decisions in the face of uncertainty. Together, innovation and research are vital to the full spectrum of emergency management efforts, ensuring that we are not only prepared to respond to crises, but also capable of minimising their impact on lives and livelihoods. So as we navigate the challenges of the present, we need to remember the critical importance of investing in innovation and research for emergency management. Engaging with research has been a long-standing commitment of the South Australian Government, of all stripes, including providing ongoing support and funding to NHRA and its predecessor. And as a government, we continue to foster these relationships both at a state and national level to ensure that the future of emergency management and research has the capability to address the evolving challenge of natural hazards. Once again, thank you for inviting me here today to speak on behalf of the Minister. I do apologise to Brendan in advance. Parliament is sitting and I'm the government whip, and I need to get back there to make sure they're all doing the right thing. But I sincerely hope you have a good conference and that many good things come out of it. Thank you very much, Ben.
Thank you very much, Mr Oldenwater, for those kind words. And there's 300 people in the room that are all very keen to get a part of that 93% funding and take it forward. Ladies and gentlemen, we have just been part of an excellent welcome to country and smoking ceremony, and I too would like to pay my respects and acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land, the Kaurna people, and acknowledge elders past, present and emerging, and pay respect to any Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander with us in this room today or online. We have brought with us to this forum, the third forum, our talking sticks. They were created out of first forum in Brisbane back in 2022 by Uncle Marcus. And these sticks are an important symbol of our shared values, knowledge and safe passage through the sharing process. We've used them at events across the country, and to our speakers and panellists today, you're welcome to hold them while you are presenting throughout the forum. Now, unfortunately, as part of hosting this session, you get all the housekeeping notes from me. So let me go through them. All our plenary sessions are in this room today and are being live streamed to an audience around Australia and New Zealand. Can I ask our presenters to speak clearly into microphones? If you don't use the microphone, the listeners online will not hear you. If you could also keep to time, our timekeepers will be waving cards at speakers. If you get to feel a presence over your shoulder, you know you've run out of cards, and the next is the hook from the side of the stage. All the plenary sessions over the 3 days will be here in this hall, but tomorrow and Thursday, this room is stream 1 and streams 2 and 3 are just a short walk to the gallery and exhibition hall. NHRA staff will be directing you to the session that you wish to attend. If I can ask you to think about that in advance so that we move between sessions quickly, that would be much appreciated. At the conclusion of today, and that might be why we've got such a full house at the National Wine Centre, you're welcome to join us for some light refreshments at the end of the day, just outside this hall. Questions and comments will be taken from the floor. They can also be sent through Slido. There was a QR code on the screen, but you'll be able to access Slido for questions. Questions will be moderated and published, and you can upvote or stress the questions you want to hear answered by giving a thumbs up. The session chair will read out the most voted Slido questions and put them to our presenters. You can also join the conversation on social media from the Natural Hazards Research Forum using the hashtag NHRF24 and tag us at Hazards Research ! If I stumbled through that, no surprise, I'm not a great social media person. This forum is all about learning and sharing experiences and knowledge. The forum tagline is provoke, inspire, challenge and be involved. And all participants are expected to engage respectfully with the spirit of the forum, both online and here at the forum. That does not mean we should ignore the word provoke, because provocation, as some of you have heard me speak, is one of my favourites, and it sometimes brings out the best in innovation. Now, this year we are doing something different. We have engaged a graphic artist. Dana is here somewhere. Hello, waving to the end of the room. A talented graphic recorder, not just a graphic recorder, a talented. She will capture the essence of the event in a unique and exciting way, and we'll get a chance to share in that visual representation and have discussions around it. It's not just visually striking, but it's also a valuable resource for capturing insights and sharing ideas. She'll be roaming the rooms and capturing the images that describe what we've been doing and thinking. If you have something particular to share, please approach Dana throughout the process. Housekeeping out the way, thank goodness they say. And we can move on to our first keynote speaker. This afternoon we'll have 2 keynote speakers, being Brendan Moon, Coordinator General of NEMA, and Andrew Gissing, CEO of Natural Hazards Research Australia. We'll keep our questions to the end of both presentations, and then we'll go through questions to them in more of a panel session. So, Brendan, if that's news to you, I hope that's all right. Can I introduce Brendan, Coordinator General at National Emergency Management. We're very pleased that Brendan has accepted our invitation to address our annual forum again. I think this is 3 years straight now, Brendan. Thank you. And your words have certainly made an important contribution in our past sessions in setting the scene for things that we need to be thinking about. Brendan.
Iain, Andrew, wow. You know, I'd look at the evolution of this forum over the last 3 years and also the other iterations of the centre prior to this, and I think what a magnificent gathering. I see very many old faces, people that we've worked with, people that we have shared many experiences with, but I think the thing that fills me with, I suppose, great pride, but also great hope for the future are all the new faces in this space, those who are wishing to contribute to a more safe and secure nation. I too would like to begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land on which we meet, the Kaaru people of the Adelaide Plains, and pay my respects to their elders past and present, and I extend that respect to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples here today. My role today, as it was last year, is really around provoking, and I'm sure plenty of my colleagues here from Queensland Reconstruction Authority say I'm a past master at that, so it's good to see you again, team. Challenging and getting people involved in the conversation that we need to have. I don't know whether I'll inspire, I'll let others make that judgment later on. But what I wanted to build the conversation around today, and I don't want to do a lot of speaking really or answer too many questions, what I would like to do is start to outline what are some of the challenges that we have, what are some of the choices we must make, and what your role is in that. And that's really my intention here today. And I recognise that many people will have different views on how we get there, and we accept that. But that recognises the diversity of our communities throughout the nation. It also recognises the diversity of thought, which is what we really sorely need in this particular space. Can I also acknowledge the importance of science and research as a national capability? We regularly talk about national capabilities in the emergency management space as how many firefighting aircraft we have, how many fire trucks we have, how big is our volunteer capacity. But sometimes I think we lose the importance of research and critical thinking about the choices that we need to make into the future, and we don't necessarily recognise that that's a national capability that we need to grow, we need to nurture, and we need to resource into the future. Also acknowledge the many contributions the Centre have made over the years in informing many of the choices that we have made following major disasters throughout the nation. They have been instrumental in making our nation safer. These 3 days provide an exceptional opportunity to come together and start to challenge our thinking, start to make real choices, and start to work out a plan of what we need to do next as a nation. Setting the scene for the next 3 days, I don't think is that challenging. Let's look what's happened over the last 2 decades. Making a plan informed by experience, expertise, the latest research and critical thinking is really the challenge. But the beauty of what we are faced with and the challenge that we are faced with is it's in our hands. For many of you, you will know, or some of you might know, the former Special Representative to the United Nations, Dr. Robert Glasser, on disaster risk reduction. And Robert's writing, I think, has informed a lot of our philosophy here in Australia in terms of how we build resilience within our communities. And he says this, which drives a lot of our workings within the National Emergency Management Agency. Climate change makes it fundamentally necessary to discard the notion that national-scale crises occur infrequently. They are becoming annual occurrences. The acceleration of major climate events risks overwhelming governments and communities' capacity to respond effectively, and we essentially find ourselves in a permanent state of response and recovery. But he also highlights, and I think this is one of our big challenges that we need to talk about this week, is that there is always the risk that we could be accused, like some generals, of fighting the last war. So how do we change our focus into the medium and longer term? And I think you're an integral part of how we do change that thinking. These insights from Robert Glasser are more relevant as we've just emerged from our latest high-risk weather season. Yes, we know that globally our climate and weather patterns are changing. We've experienced predictive models being off the mark, and we've also seen in our work how traditional expectations around when a season starts and when it finishes needs to change. There is mounting pressure on our system. We're also witnessing year on year the costs of natural disasters here in Australia, but also globally, expand at an extraordinary rate, putting pressure not only on our communities, but also on the sustainability of our existing relationships. Last week when I spoke, or might have been the week before when I was in Canberra, I spoke about some of those key challenges and the changes we need to make and those choices we must consider in this particular space. But when I look at what we have in our most recent decades, and then I look at in the last couple of years, when we overlay a global pandemic, when we overlay geopolitical issues a long way from our borders and the impact that has on the functioning of our community and our society, these challenges will be really complex. I even look most recently on Friday, the space weather event, where we actually experienced a G5 event, and it was somewhat it somewhat reminded me when some of the key questions coming from the private sector, or what are we going to do when our power networks, our communication networks, everything that we fundamentally rely on are down for considerable periods of time. And it made us feel uneasy. And I think it was quite prescient. I have here today, and I think many of you know Joe Buffoni. Joe, do you want to stand up? Because I think you should say hello to people. Because Joe's actually conducting, it's okay, mate. Joe is actually leading a space weather exercise here in Adelaide in a week's time, Joe, Operation Aurora, which not only brings together private sector and all the emergency management agencies throughout Australia, but also has international interest in it as well. And I think what we saw across the globe last week was a serious reflection that this isn't just all around natural hazards. It isn't just about some of the complex supply chain issues that we experience. This is about how we do prepare, how we do set up our systems, and how we do understand what each other's do and how important we are to our futures. Let's just reflect briefly on the most recent season. I remember being in a room a couple of months ago with a senior public servant who said, "You've had a pretty quiet start to the year, haven't you, Brendan?" Yet if we look across Australia, 44 events, 2 out of 3 councils in the nation activated for some sort of relief measure on the back of our most significant flooding that we have experienced ever here in Australia. And I think the things that I take away from that most recent high-risk weather season, and everyone is different here, is the size and the scale and the intensity of the events that we faced. 900 millimetres of rain in one night in far north Queensland as a result of Tropical Cyclone Jasper. Overwhelming all the engineering systems, water, sewerage, power, communications, because they're just not engineered for that, those sorts of falls. The intensity, and I forgot to mention in Victoria, catastrophic bushfires one afternoon, and then the next day major flooding affecting a small local government community. And the message from the Mayor, we weren't expecting that this early in October. That's something we would experience usually in February. So really significant challenges to our system, our thinking and the way in which we organise ourselves. Secondly, the intensity of the events challenging our traditional warning systems and our notion of community preparedness. The speed of these events is now challenging all our planning, the way we message our communities and the way we prepare our messaging. And then finally, the notion that Australians are resilient, and many of our communities are indeed resilient communities, and can look after themselves in the immediate aftermath of a big event. Those assumptions are being fundamentally challenged by the events that we've experienced. As we look at the loss of power, the loss of communications, the loss of connectivity from the outside world and the impact it has on already vulnerable communities, they are significant challenges for us, and we are looking for your input in terms of how we deal with those, how do we better prepare for them. There's a snapshot of what recovery looks like, a bit of a proxy for what we've experienced in the last 5 years, and I've chosen the Black Summer bushfires as a benchmark. So when people talk about increasing frequency of events, and I know it's a short time frame, we're tracking around about 30 or 50 disaster activations across the nation a year. However, The mix of those is changing quite considerably, obviously driven by the natural environment. But what does stand out is the absolute intensity and the cost to our community of these events. So we've gone in 2019, the bushfire events of 2019, roughly $1 billion spend in terms of recovery. Now that is sixfold as we look at the outlays for this particular year. And this actually goes to the sustainability, but also importantly, and I don't think we can walk away from this, it's not just about a sustainable system that resources recovery and reconstruction and risk reduction. It's also a question, if you move amongst these communities, it's about accessibility. It's also about equity. And there are clear differences across Australia, the availability, the equity and the accessibility of support. And we need to recognise that. And we need to recognise that at a local level, at a regional level, a state level, but also at a national level. So what have we been doing in the meantime? We've framed the challenge. We're now starting to ask ourselves, what are the choices we must make? And yes, we've been listening, we've been learning, there have been multiple reviews, and I still go back to the reviews of the Productivity Commission back in 2015. And the messages coming out of those reviews, and they go directly to the work being done by the centre here. It's about greater coordination. It's about understanding risk. It's about designing a system that can support our communities as they prepare. So painting that future for our communities, about how they need to prepare, resourcing that accordingly, but importantly also resourcing our national capabilities as well. These are extraordinarily important decisions and choices. But you know what? The guideposts are there already. And I think it says a lot around the choices that need to be made and sometimes us balking at those choices. And I think that's the role for you. If by your work you can provide us the confidence that those choices are based in science and in fact, I think we'll get a long way down the track in terms of delivering and actually implementing what needs to be done into the future. Because as I work and I live in this space and we listen to many of those communities, a lot of what we are doing is informed by experience, by expertise, and the most recent event. And I think probably what's lacking in our community, and this is the space for you, is painting a picture of what our future looks like. Starting to prioritise what our choices need to be. We are not going to flood-proof the nation. We're not going to cyclone-proof it, bushfire-proof it. But we need to have a coherent plan that we need to deliver on. And as I said before, that's the beauty and I think the strength of your agenda now, is that many of the priorities and those choices that we need to make as a nation is now starting to be informed by the work that you are doing. Another big question and a big choice for us after every event. Are we hitting the mark? Have we got the mix right? I think it's important to recognise in any of these systems as we support our community, we have three priorities here as we build our system here in Australia. We really are focusing on building a scalable system that can respond and recover anywhere in the nation, no matter the community, the size of the event and the type of the event. We recognise that we get the best outcomes when recovery, reconstruction, preparation is locally led, but we need to recognise that capacity has limits. So that's the role of government. It's also the role of yourselves. And then finally, we should be using every opportunity to invest in risk reduction. But I think what is behind these numbers is quite instructive as well, is if we look at what we are investing in terms of risk reduction and resilience, I note the narrative is all around 97.3, which is a Productivity Commission review number from 2014, was essentially informed by the data sets leading up to 2014. Now we're running at around about 87% is on recovery reconstruction, 13% on resilience and risk reduction. But if we look behind these figures, it's a tale of two investment streams. We have some areas that are absolutely focused, and resilient recovery, the notion of risk reduction, is a priority for them. And there are some regions where let's get it back to where it was before. Let's just get the community functioning again. And that's the switch we need to change. And when we look at all the money that's actually being funneled into building resilience as a nation, you'll often be confronted, and I expect it during and after the budget process and over the coming months, there is not enough money being invested in risk reduction. But when we actually look at what's being delivered on the ground, it's more like 25-30% of those programs have been delivered, 65 to 70% still to deliver. And I think part of the issue there is so much money, so many events impacting the people that we rely on to deliver these, and it's a real challenge in terms of delivery. So how do we change the system? How do we incentivise people to actually invest? But importantly, how do we start to describe the outcomes that we are seeking to achieve as a community? And I think that's what's missing. I can provide financial figures all day, but unless we can, as policymakers, as funding bodies, start to describe the outcomes that we are seeking at a community level and at a national level, then we're going to get more of the same into the future. So, in terms of our priorities at the National Emergency Management Agency, and this really is not just NEMA's priorities, this is informed by all of those reviews, but it is also very much aligned with the work of the Centre, Natural Hazards Research Alliance, Australia, but also the work going on in many of the states. And it's about developing a national picture of risk, because if we don't, we will continue to get the same as we've had historically. Knee-jerk investment driven by the most recent event. We continue to fight the last battles. We are building capability across the system. We're starting to look over the horizon around what's important. And we're absolutely focused on more investment, targeted investment, achieving real outcomes in terms of managing and reducing risk. Two I'd like to call out, two particular streams of work. The National Risk Profile, which Joe Buffoni is leading within NEMA. And this really builds on for what has happened internationally and is building on the methodology that is being used by the United States, by Canada, by New Zealand and by the United Kingdom. And this year, for the first time ever, we'll be developing a picture of national risk. And those key hazards that we'll be looking at: bushfire, cyclone, heat wave, flooding. I've forgotten one other, Joe. That's it. And we intend over the coming years to further develop not only the methodology, but also the hazards that we are looking to actually mitigate risk for. And this will make an enormous difference to guide investment and also policy decisions. Importantly, your membership are starting to inform what our picture of risk looks like into the future, so that we don't fall into that habit of just responding to the most recent event or just looking at what is here, what is now that we need to do. So a real risk-based approach to investment and also policy. The other one, which is linked quite closely here, is we're not just looking at the emergency management sector, and I think this is the beauty of this forum here today, bringing together so many different sectors, is that we are working very, very closely with the insurance industry. I think it's sometimes forgotten. The most powerful tool historically in our mitigation toolbox has been insurance. But we recognise the frequency of events globally and also here in the nation, and also our approach to resilience and mitigating risk. We've seen the protection gap, so that provided by insurance is diminishing. And the reality is that will fall at the feet of all Australian taxpayers. So we're working very, very closely with the insurers to work out at a household level what steps can they take to reduce the cost of insurance, but also to increase availability of insurance around the country. We're also working with them to get an understanding of what people's attitudes are to risk, to getting prepared for new events, and also starting to paint a picture about what are the key investments and policy changes, be it building codes, land use planning, be it investment in hard infrastructure, or importantly in soft infrastructure in our communities, do we need to take so that we can mitigate future risk. And we're working very, very closely with the 5 biggest insurers in the country and many agencies in that space as well. And I think, drawing to a conclusion, Ian, I think I've used my time up. I'd just like to recognise the great work that's obviously being done by the Natural Hazards Research Australia. And I think I can see Kate Lavrensic there, who was one of the architects of the Get Ready program in Queensland, where we started to work with communities about better preparing them. And it was interesting how then the private sector got involved in that, and to see the shift in community attitudes towards an upcoming high-risk weather season and the preparations they need to take. But what I'd like to recognise here, though, is your work, and Andrew will be launching this as he follows me, is actually, do we need to think differently about this in a nation that is hardwired for peace, a nation that is hardwired for it'll be okay, it won't affect me. We actually need to get ahead of ready. And I'd like to congratulate NHRA on your forethought and the changing and the tweaking of that message, because I think it's so desperately needed. Thank you.
Thanks, Brendan. And whilst it's very flattering to hear those words about what the centre has achieved, I look at the room and it's what you have achieved. We're but the funnel for some money and funding and trying to enable and amplify opportunities, but it's the researchers, our end users, our participants that achieve the change, so thank you for that. And I'll introduce Andrew to the stage shortly, but just reflecting on a couple of Brendan's words. I mean, how often do we hear the phrase or the term, you know, we just weren't expecting that? Well, there should be no reason for us not to expect that. And we hang our hats too often, or we see people hang their hats and say, but it was unprecedented. It's a word I'd just like to strike from the English language, I think, that and pivot, because I'm not pivoting anymore. But the issues of equity and accessibility cut to the chase of this, and then affordability, of course, on top of that. But the underlying tones that I heard were, you know, resilient systems, resilient infrastructure, resilient homes, resilient communities, which they all add up to make. And I guess the function of equity and accessibility and affordability is livability. And if that's what we can provide for the communities across Australia, we can all be proud. Andrew, can I welcome you to the stage, please?
Thank you, Iain, and thank you all for being here. I would firstly like to pay my respects to the traditional custodians of the land of which we are on here today, the Kaurna people. I pay respects to their elders past, present and emerging. I also pay my respects to First Nations people that join us here today. I also want to pay an acknowledgement to those that we essentially serve our communities, and I think the graphic that Brendan put up of the disasters that have struck our nation over the last decade, and the frequency of those events and the sheer scale of those events across our countries. And remember, it's as a former minister that I worked for in Victoria said, it's the person with the metre of floodwater through their house that we are all here for. And I pay my acknowledgements to those that have suffered through natural disasters over our past and will do so in the future. And that's why we're all here today, really to focus on the safety, their resilience and sustainability. So I urge you, amongst all the other themes that come together throughout our forum, to always consider who we are doing this very, very vital work for. I also want to thank Cliffy Wilson for a fantastic welcome to country, Lee Oldenwater MP for being able to come today out of his busy schedule at Parliament to be able to open today's proceedings and the rest of the forum, and also Brendan Moon, our Coordinator General from NEMA. Brendan, you've come back 3 times now, and you are one of the reasons why these events are successful in terms of coming back each year, sharing those national directions, providing that national leadership, and we're very proud to say that we've got a fantastic relationship with NEMA, as we do all our organisations throughout our Natural Hazards Research Australia ecosystem. And so thank you for all being here, whether or not you're here in person or online somewhere across Australia. As has already been said, this is our 3rd Natural Hazards Research Forum. It's your participation that makes it a success. So it's your energy, it's your questions, it's the discussions and conversations that you have in response to the research which was presented and the questions posed, which absolutely makes this a success. So bring that energy throughout the forum. I also reflect too back to Brisbane. We've got a much larger group here today, which is fantastic, but I think you will also see throughout the program a maturing NHRA in terms of the program of research which we are now executing on. It's also events like this that relationships are built, and we know how critical relationships are to ensuring the utilisation of research and that ongoing collaboration. So again, it's the definition of the problems, the solutioneering that happens in rooms like this and throughout the forum, which are absolutely vital. Across this year's forum, we're really trying to prosecute 2 key elements. One is that I'm going to touch on in a moment, and Brendan has already touched on, is bigger thinking and having conversations about bigger, more transformative thinking. The other aspect is the end game of all the work that we do at NHRA is ultimately having impact and utilisation. So having a key focus and conversations about that. So in what I'm going to provide today, I'm going to give a short address around some of the activities that are going on in the centre, to give you an update on those. And then I'm going to go through the report that's on your tables there. And as I've said to people, it's not so much a report, it's actually a conversation that we are wanting to start through launching our Be Ahead Ready report. And I will touch on that around the big ideas needed for our future and the bigger thinking. So firstly, many of you will have seen this slide at various forums before, or various stakeholder presentations around the country that we make. But I just want to remind everybody that the key focus of our centre is on impact. It's about building safer, more resilient and sustainable communities in the face of natural hazards. This is achieved through the centre's end-user driven model, which is ultimately focused on creating knowledge which is translated, which is useful, usable and ultimately used. Collaboration is absolutely vital to the success of the centre, and as a centre we foster this collaborative ecosystem of researchers and users, but it's through working together as a whole that we actually start to transform the centre and the sector, and that we're actually able to start getting a step ahead in our work and the vital work in creating that impact. We now boast 32 different participant organisations across the country in their many various forms. So we not only have emergency services, we have planning organisations, we've got infrastructure organisations, we've got NGOs, not-for-profits, etc. And that list continues to build out over time. We have the key end-user driven focus, where end users are able to put forward research concepts. We've had over 90 research concepts received in our various rounds out to end users to date, of which we've been able to fund around about a third of. It's also the fantastic research institutions that we work with across the country and the very many talented researchers that we have in our program who bring passion and intellect to the centre's research, which is absolutely vital, again, to that energy and that collaboration and the thought leadership that our centre is able to provide and realising of that potential. We also have our amazing group of postgraduate researchers, and they met this morning upstairs sharing their research and their passion for the sector and the change which is needed. This slide illustrates all the research institutions that we are working with, which now total some 46 different organisations. So in terms of some key statistics, we've now got just over 50 funded core research projects across many, many different themes, and they are being responsive to the needs of national, local, state stakeholders, industry and the community in terms of the needs for that research. We also have 61 different students in our postgraduate programs. We'll soon be announcing new projects through our latest round of research, and we're also very happy that there's very strong alignment, as Brendan illustrated, between our work and what's going on nationally in terms of both policy directions and capability development. We'll also soon be announcing our First Nations scholarship also to assist with building further First Nations research capability. But it's fundamental that our research is being used. So research at the centre continues to foster is clearly making a difference. So the 8R handbooks that NHRA and the former Bushfire Natural CRC has had input into, now downloaded over 18,000 times. The Australian Exposure Information Portal, 40,000 reports generated. Close to 500,000 different user sessions of the Australian Disaster Resilience Index. If those that love listening to the radio in far north Queensland, like I did during the cyclones last year, would have heard all the community safety announcements which were engaging with communities, which were informed by research that was undertaken by the Bushfire Natural CSC and of which we continue to foster. Another key example is the Fit for Task work, which has been informed through research, which is about the development of minimum fitness standards across SESs nationally. And this is now being rolled out nationally to ensure that our SES volunteers that put their lives at risk and that we should all pay very much respect to are as safe as possible. The work too that we've been doing with JCU and University of Queensland through the SwellNet program to provide funding to be able to make this data available in real time and online from the mobile anemometers. Again, that was in action during the last cyclone season. Also, the work that we've recently completed with SI Frontiers, which has now been incorporated in Digital Earth Australia, around mapping water sources for aerial firefighting, such that that information is now available for critical capability around aerial firefighting. The work that Dr Tim Neal and Oliver Costello have recently completed around cultural land management, making resources available to practitioners to inform cultural land management governance and research for our future. Also, the work that we've been doing in Northern Australia with traditional owners and First Nation ranger groups in that space. This is about empowering First Nation ranger groups in the context of traditional emergency management frameworks in northern Queensland. It's also the thought leadership that the centre provides. And so last year we worked with Suncorp to deliver a program around assisted relocations and launched a discussion guide to further policy thinking in this space, but also further conversations throughout the community around the role that assisted relocation has, a topic which is both vital but obviously contentious. Also, our work is receiving awards. Some of you that were at the forum last year will remember the presentation by CFA and Dr Bryony Towers as well. This is one that recently Resilient Australia Award, but also furthering this work, this project's received a Disaster Ready Fund grant and is now being able to scale that work further across the country, which is a fantastic result. Our early career researchers also continue to do great things, and Fadia Isaac here on this slide, winning one of our awards. We've got a fantastic cohort, and again, it's not just the work that we do through our core program, it's the work that we're doing to build the future generation of researchers, the future generation of policymakers through the work that we can do through our education and training programs. We've also just recently launched our first work placement, and this program will continue to build over the next 12 months as well as we offer more opportunities. Our first work placement is in with New South Wales National Parks and Wildlife Service, specialising in translating research in that context. Our early career fellowships will also continue over the next 12 months as well. Last week also saw the launch of our Disaster Challenge for 2024, and so if you're a postgraduate student or early career researcher, we certainly encourage you to put in an entry to consider an innovative solution to the wicked problem that we have posed for this year's challenge. And for more information on the challenge, please go and visit our website. Our team is also very much focused on translating research, so making sure that research is useful, usable and ultimately used. And so if you haven't been on one of our recent webinars, please, if there's a webinar that's taking your fancy, get on there and engage with the knowledge which is being expressed by our researchers and the conversations online about those webinars and that research also. Also, our hazard notes, as the collection of those will grow as our portfolio of research continues to mature. And also, for all the activities that the Centre is running, the newsletter is the best place to go and to subscribe to that to keep up to date with all this very important activity. So, as you can see, there's clearly a lot going on in the Centre, and there's certainly more to come. But again, I reiterate the point that the success of the Centre is up to everybody in the room. As I recently said to somebody, that we're a bit like the lemon, right? The harder you squeeze us, the more you can possibly get out of us in that sense. So we are wanting to engage, we are wanting our networks to build and also create this knowledge that will ultimately lead to use and impact. But I do now want to switch gears to talking about bigger thinking and, most importantly, our Beheaded Ready report that we're proud to be launching at the forum. I use that word report, but I do want to reiterate it's a conversation. And as you pick it up and read it, we are not promising that it's a perfect document with the perfect directions for the future. We expect some critique, we expect different ideas, we expect some debate about the ideas that are being expressed. But that's the whole point. We want to lift the conversation around our table to be not about the last disaster, about how we're responding to recommendations from it. We are wanting to be thinking about how are we going to be responding to these events in future decades. So the project's been undertaken with a realisation of the urgency of the natural hazard threat. It's not that we can wait years to simply now commence research and to see the impacts. We are seeing the threat realised on a day-to-day basis across our nation. And the need to transform our approaches and to think big has never been more important. So it is clear that we are living in a world of increasing risks from natural hazards. The Royal Commission into National Natural Disaster Arrangements, among many other reports, both in Australia and internationally, have concluded that natural hazard emergencies are expected to become more frequent, more complex, more unpredictable and more difficult to manage. Simply, more bad news for everybody. These challenges will pose greater demands on disaster management capabilities that are already under pressure. The need is urgent. Doing more of the same is no longer sufficient. Small changes won't get us there in time. As a nation, we must evolve, we must transform, and that's what we call being ahead of ready. Ahead of ready is to achieve a future end state where communities are safe, resilient and sustainable. It is to be ahead of the curve where risk is foreseen, proactive measures are taken to reduce or adapt to threats and ensure sufficient future capability exists to minimise impacts via response and aid recovery from disasters. Being ahead of ready requires us all to think larger and bigger and bolder and to embrace a diversity of different ideas. Not one discipline will get us there. We will need, again, that collective effort. We must be creative, we must be innovative, visionary and strategic. The challenge is collectively ours. We are all leaders in this space. Too often, however, change is reactive in the aftermath of natural hazard events, and it's incremental. How do we strive to a transformative, more ambitious model of change in anticipation of worsening threats to create a long-term vision? Being ahead of ready means we must consider emerging threats as opportunities. It requires us to shift our thinking about from the next weather season to the decade ahead and beyond. It means moving from tactical, short-term decision-making about the last disaster event to focus on the implication of longer-term trends. History shows that we can actually make change. It's not just daunting to think about our future, that we must just simply roll on it as it is. If we look, for example, about the changes in the number of people dying from natural hazards globally, we can see that decreasing, even as our population continues to rise, principally because of the growth in early warning systems being made possible through technological advances in telecommunications and other forms as well. Change, however, will not be without challenge. As innovation accelerates, agencies are already challenged in keeping pace with the assessment, the cost and the implementation of new technologies. Change is also altering the requirements of our future workforce and will pose ethical questions and dilemmas. Change will require a proactive, whole-of-community approach. It will be essential. We will need a diversity of skills, expertise, and most of all, we'll need to be curious. Research is a critical part to play. Research provides innovation, providing evidence and technology, and through testing new ideas. Research can identify the knowledge that we can build upon and the gaps where we need to know more before we proceed. Armed with that new knowledge, research can map the ways forward through collaborative, diverse range of stakeholders and across a range of scientific disciplines. We can make it. Natural Hazard Research Australia, through its Be Ahead Already initiative, has undertaken research and consultation to identify these big ideas to drive a resilient, safe and sustainable future. We've worked with about 300 different stakeholders to bring together the report with the assistance of AETHA. Stakeholders were asked to think outside of their sector, to think boldly, out of their comfort zone and about ideas that would change the future. Those that attended last year's forum will remember that we ran a session before the main program on our Be Ahead Already program. The report represents many of the ideas that came through as an iterative process through that stakeholder consultation and research. And as I said, it's designed to promote thinking and conversations and debate. The ideas are not exhaustive, and we certainly seek feedback about the ideas, their prioritisation, and also how they can inspire future research. So what I'll do now is I'll now start to present some of the ideas that were raised through the stakeholder consultations. And keeping in mind too that when presenting these ideas, I don't want you to think about today. I want you to have a serious go at actually trying to put yourself into the future. Think about the trends that are going to be experienced. Think about the opportunities that we have as a nation. So firstly, imagine when a severe natural hazard threatens, that emergency services could in real time forecast, identify and triage people and properties most in need and then automatically task autonomous assets with minimal human intervention to provide life-saving assistance, warnings and other support. The escalating deployment of advanced sensors such as drones, wearables, ground-based sensors and satellites, alongside the expanding capabilities of artificial intelligence, presents a transformative opportunity to enhance situational awareness, predictive modelling and ultimately the decision-making process. These technological advancements have the potential to revolutionise how we prepare, respond and ultimately recover from disasters, making our communities safer and more resilient. The integration of data from these diverse sensor networks provides a comprehensive real-time picture of human, natural and built environments. AI's ability to analyse vast data sets from these sensors means decision makers can access nuanced insights into evolving emergency situations. The development of common national systems for data integration and sharing is essential for fostering interoperability among emergency services and for achieving multidimensional situational awareness, as well as for scaling future innovation. Autonomous robots and vehicles equipped with advanced sensors, AI and communications technologies represents a leap forward in emergency response capabilities. Autonomous assets could be deployed with minimal human intervention based on predictive analysis to areas of the greatest need and coordinate amongst each other to deliver maximum effect. By working in environments too hostile for humans, These robots and vehicles augment human response capabilities and make it safer for our first responders. We know also how critical emergency warnings are to the safety of our communities. So imagine, as a natural hazard threatens, you receive an emergency warning tailored to your personal circumstances that prompts you to take action. Currently, warnings largely assume that all individuals are similar, when in reality, individuals and households can be significantly different, with varying vulnerabilities, habits, and interpretation of information. By leveraging the wealth of data generated by individuals' digital footprints, personal digital twins can be created. Personal digital twins will be a representation that mirrors an individual's physical, psychological, and behavioural characteristics. Emergency warning systems can utilise personal digital twins to evolve to provide alerts that are not only geographically specific, but are also tailored to individual circumstances, behaviours, vulnerabilities, and preferences. Incorporating AI-powered chatbots and virtual assistants into emergency warning systems could transform the ways individuals interact with and respond to warnings. Instead of one-way communication, individuals could ask questions about their specific circumstances, receive real-time updates, and access advice on how to prepare or respond. Augmented reality would also enable individuals to visualise the possible consequences of an emergency. For example, the predicted flood height within their home, or what an Ember attack at that same location might look like. AI could assist to direct preparedness efforts by identifying opportunities around people's homes to avoid danger and reduce damages, and assist to arrange skills and maintenance to affect those recommendations. Beyond the immediate emergency warnings, the same personalised interactive approach could transform community engagement and preparedness activities. We also could explore similar strains around global warning capabilities to ensure that no matter the location of where you are on Earth or what hazard is being faced, that all individuals on our planet could access early warning systems. Our keynote speaker tomorrow, Dr. Sally Potter, is going to explore the concept of personalised warnings in a lot more detail. We also note, particularly from Brendan's presentation, about the efforts going into disaster resilience mitigation and also improved consideration of natural hazards in urban policy. So imagine that no new homes are exposed to high hazard and frequent natural hazard impacts, and that existing homes in high-risk areas were retrofitted to ensure resilience to impacts, or their residents were supported to relocate to safer areas. An improved approach to land use planning, urban design and home construction is needed to make sure our homes and communities are less exposed to more frequent natural hazard impacts. Amongst others, stakeholders that we consulted have nominated the need for the following: nationally consistent hazard mapping inclusive of all natural hazards and guidance for use of climate projections. Improved understanding of community risk appetite and potential natural hazard event damages in decision-making. Maintenance and investment in social infrastructure. Consideration of assisted relocation strategies for homes in high-risk areas. Local government capability development activities and initiatives, and the development of building materials that make our homes more resilient and safer. Existing building stock should not be ignored, and that there is a need for a risk-based national retrofitting strategy. We must also consider the role of nature and caring for country in our strategies and building resilient communities. We already know that measures such as planting of trees reduce urban heat, that restoring mangroves in coastal areas reduces coastal hazards, and that these measures have enormous co-benefits, such as better water quality, better air quality, better mental health, and enhanced biodiversity. And ultimately, the opportunities being created through biodiversity targets and future biodiversity markets to be investing in these initiatives. Knowledge of risk and resilience is ultimately key to investing in the right areas. And again, focusing on that national priority that Brendan outlined in terms of the national natural hazard risk profile. So imagine we could have a continuous snapshot of natural hazard risk and resilience across Australia, not just one single perspective, but a continuous snapshot over time. A dynamic measurement of risk and resilience would be crucial to maintaining up-to-date understanding of the challenges and opportunities in disaster risk and reduction and climate change adaptation. Such dynamic measurement would serve critical functions. Firstly, it would ensure a timely understanding of risk and resilience, reflecting the latest environmental changes, social changes, economic developments and technological advancements. This awareness is vital to anticipating future trends and preparing for emergency threats. For emergency managers, a dynamic approach to measure resilience would facilitate improved allocation of resources for preparedness, but also recovery, and enable the tracking of recovery progress. Secondly, the dynamic measurement allows for the evaluation of resilience investments, enabling stakeholders to assess effectiveness of the different interventions and allocate funding wisely. There is essential for optimising the effectiveness of these investments moving forward. A dynamic approach to measuring resilience will require a concentrated effort to develop and implement standardised yet adaptable methodologies that can account for the dynamic nature of risk and resilience, and will also need the timely data collection and continuous monitoring and adaptive learning to understand how resilience capabilities evolve over time. And so who's going to be the enablers of all this work in the future? It will be our future workforce and bringing about transformative change. So imagine that when a severe natural hazard threatens, there was confidence in the capability and capacity to meet the threat. So our current workforce and ways of working are being stretched by the increasing range and number of natural hazards, but also not only climate change, but land use planning and urban policy is also contributing in part, and social changes and where we live and work. So at this time, new technology also offers the opportunity for a more innovative and effective workforce. Technology opportunities include the adoption of bionic augmentation consisting of exoskeletons, augmented reality, brain-computer interfaces. Exoskeletons offer unprecedented prospects for enhancing physical abilities, enabling individuals to perform tasks with increased strength and endurance. Augmented reality transforms the way we interact with the world, overlaying digital information into the physical environment to provide immersive experiences and real-time data. And brain-computer interfaces represent a groundbreaking leap, facilitating direct communication between the human brain and external devices, potentially revolutionising how we control technology and access information. And we're already seeing that at work in the disability space. Consultation with stakeholders identified the need for a national capability plan. Such a plan was said to need to consider things such as an approach to natural hazard management which extends beyond our traditional stakeholders and taking into account a whole-of-community approach. Also needing to revolutionise the skills in our workforce, not just those that are needed to respond and recover, but those that are fundamentally required to reduce risk. Also the adoption of the technologies that I've just mentioned to reduce demands on the traditional workforce models. And also, how do we best diversify our emergency management workforce to ensure that critical knowledge and a range of perspectives are brought to the bear? And also further opportunities for international collaboration, particularly as global disasters become more of the norm. All of this investment and ideas ultimately come down to economics as well, so we must consider the economics of natural hazards. So consider and imagine if we were to understand the true cost of natural hazards, to effectively allocate resources to maximise disaster risk reduction outcomes for communities. So delivering resilience outcomes in Australia will require significant investment. Investment decision-making is complex and often involves many different criteria and approaches and practices to assess a range of options to make those final investment decisions. However, accounting for the value of environmental, social and wellbeing benefits can be particularly challenging. As a consequence, investments that deliver these benefits are easily overlooked. Transforming our understanding of the true costs of natural hazards and the benefits of mitigation via a data-driven approach will ensure that disaster risk reduction resources are most effectively directed. New methods are also required to empower decision makers to pinpoint, evaluate and advocate for investments with conviction and evidence-based clarity, particularly those in the social and environmental domains. Improvement in investment decision-making could be achieved through the development of a national return on investment framework for resilience initiatives, supported by guidance of suitable assessment methods. The national framework would ensure a more transparent and consistent approach to undertaking investment decisions that account for all economic, environment and social benefits and costs. And so transformation is a team effort. It also needs public-private partnerships. So imagine disaster management could directly leverage the innovation, research and development progress of commercial enterprises by being a partner from concept to delivery. Innovation is essential to deliver the uplift of capability that is needed to support Australia in effectively and efficiently meeting our challenges. Innovation includes both the creation of new products and services, but also the application of existing products, technologies and services to new areas. A public-private partnership model is key to unleash innovation within the emergency management sector. This approach would introduce a robust national governance and investment framework designed to galvanise commercial organisations into action by cultivating a fertile investment landscape. Achieving this vision hinges on the model's ability to provide commercial entities with a supportive investment environment inclusive of streamlined avenues for commercialisation and opportunities to scale innovation via national approaches. The democratisation of government and private data also provides a fundamental opportunity for the commercial organisations and researchers to access very valuable data sets to further fire innovation. So in conclusion, our disaster managers are represented with significant and worsening challenges. It is critical to be ahead of ready. It is critical to have these conversations. It is critical to transform not only our approaches, but how we think about the future of disaster management in our country and more globally. The report provides ideas to inspire thinking about transformative change in the areas of future capability and policy. Again, we don't claim that it's a comprehensive summary. There will be more ideas and there will certainly be more debate. But we hope that after launching this report today, that we can fire that debate, that we can fire that bigger and bolder thinking. So the challenge is that no matter your job title, whether or not you're a researcher or practitioner, how are you going to take this forward? How are you, in your role as a leader in the disaster management sector, going to challenge us to think bigger and bolder for our future? We'll also be promoting this thinking at events as we go on as Natural Hazards Research Australia. The other key thing is that we're going to be seeding a lot of the conversation throughout our forum, including our first panel session directly after the break, where we'll be the opportunity will be there to interact with leading thinkers in this space. So finally, I just want to thank you again for your participation. We hope that the time that you share with us here at the Natural Hazards Research Australia Research Forum is an enlightening one for you, and that the insights that you gain, that you can take back to your organisation to generate the change that we desire and that we aim to create. So thank you, and I wish you all a very good Natural Hazards Forum.
Thanks, Andrew. If I can ask you to stay on stage. And Brendan, can I invite you to come back up? And as Brendan joins us, there's a couple of little statistics in there, Andrew, that just struck me. And I think we're going to have more of this in the future after your talk, because you're inspiring the need and the want for more research. But you talked about how many projects we get pitched, for want of a better term, and it's about a third of those are taken up. So it's an interesting stat that at any one point in time, 2/3 of our researchers are probably disappointed that their ideas didn't come forward or their end users didn't get the support. So it puts it in perspective when I hear some of those stories. It's about those end users too, because as we hear about research, and Andrew very deliberately used the term useful, usable and used. It is that term used which is all important, because our research is supported by end users, and it's for that reason, quite unashamedly, we have a focus now on evaluation of bids and projects, and part of that looks at the commitment of the end users to picking it up. If I change hats and put on my Griffith University hat for a minute, and Cheryl might talk about it in hers, last year we ran a research forum internal to the university where we heard from a large number of researchers, and almost 2-1. At the end of their presentation, they said, now we need to find someone to pick up the research and use it. And that's really disappointing, that there's that much effort going in that's out there that we probably don't all know about. And if that's at one university, imagine that multiplied across the country. So it's getting that commitment by end users right up front. And the evidence of that is then, I mean, academic recognition is fantastic, especially all of our PhD students and others striving for that goal, absolutely. But for me, there's no greater pride in seeing a piece of research sitting on a minister's desk or sitting on a bureaucrat's desk, as I know a piece of research has from time to time of late, and see it getting picked up and referred to and used and read on almost a daily basis. The future ideas you put, Andrew, I probably think should be mainstream business as usual today, but the reality is we've got a lot to change in the future, so a provocation is absolutely what we need. And I'm looking at the audience now. We have, David, we've got roving mics, and we have some Slido questions that will come up on screen. And while people in the room start to think about what questions they might like to ask, and we provide mics to them, we'll go to the Slido questions. And thanks, John, for putting your name to one, and we'll come to that one because it's got a name and it's not just anonymous. But the top one, what happened to the key principle of not doing to but rather doing with? Where are the voices of community in your work? And that's really important. And from a number of sectors, the notion of nothing about us without us comes to mind. So, Andrew, do you want to challenge or take that challenge on?
Yeah, I think one thing that I think we're really observing in that space with NHRA is a lot of the work that we're doing in the social science space, post-disasters, a number of our programs working with communities. But I go to that social science report that we launched at last year's forum, and we continue to expand that piece of work. So the work that we're doing post the 2022 Australian floods, not only in New South Wales and Queensland, but in Victoria, Tasmania, South Australia, and also back into the southern parts of New South Wales now. Really fundamentally understanding what communities want for the future, understanding future adaptation that's desired, not only how they behave, and we know that this research is already being used by our end users to better form how they respond. So I think when we're thinking about ground up, we're certainly being able to generate research which is able to inform future disaster management policy, response and capability to better the sustainability, the resilience and the safety of communities.
I think I'm the bureaucrat that Iain was referring to. Gee, I hate that term.
And I think the researcher might be in the room.
And also, I suppose I could be classified as an end user. And I don't like that either, but sort of what I can say, at the risk of embarrassing Mel Taylor, for example, the superb work her and her team did. So that's a membership of your centre here, in listening to the community and starting to get insights about how effective our approach was to recovery, how effective our warning systems were in preparing our communities for an oncoming event, and a whole range of other outcomes as a result of that event. And to me, that was just a wonderful example of listening and working with the community so that they can inform what we did. And to your point, Iain, it didn't just sit on bureaucrats' desk. We are now changing the way in which we message communities. The Australian warning system, for example, an Australia-wide approach, which actually now starts to harmonise the warnings that are provided to our community, no matter where they are and no matter what the hazard. And importantly too, some of the insights from the community about how we structure recovery, relief, reconstruction, reducing risk into the future. Very much driven by the insights that Mel and her team pull together and informing policy, investment, and also how we build capabilities, not only at a bureaucratic level, but also at a delivery level and also at a community level. So foundational pieces of work, and I just think is a great example of what you bring to the table, and we absolutely embrace the insights and the messages from that.
I think just further to Brendan too, you know, in the Be Ahead Already report and the conversation being led there, I think community leadership is absolutely critical. Why isn't community leadership one of the ideas I put up there? Because it's fundamentally something that should be being done now, right now. And if it's not, we've got a bigger issue going forward in our future than what it's not. But it's an important enabler to all that big thinking, and community needs to be at the table to be able to drive those ideas.
Thank you, and I'll read John's out just before we come to the floor. Back in 2017, we started to adopt a systemic disaster risk approach to disaster risk management. I'm not seeing this come through in the presentations here. What will be the approach for us to support a shift to systemic thinking? Top one.
Okay, so thanks very much for the question. Actually, the whole notion of risk assessment and how we deal with it is continuing to evolve. But what we are seeing is there is a lot of discussion around what's the methodology and what's the approach we actually use. And as I reflected in my earlier comments around there, in my presentation, is what we're seeing in other countries is people are making a mark in the sand. Yes, they are looking at adhering to what the international standard to risk assessment is, but they're also developing other proxies, other measures for that. And some of the work that the Insurance Partnership is doing and some of the other work that we're garnering from our overseas partner to paint a picture of risk at a national scale, but importantly at a downscaled approach, so it's highly granular, so that we can start to make key decisions there. And I think we need to take a flexible approach there and not get anchored into a particular assessment process or methodology. I think we need to be flexible, because certainly our communities here in Australia and the hazards they face and their vulnerabilities demands that we need to take a flexible approach there.
And I'd also say to that, I think we'd all, I think in the room, reflect on the need for systems to be a key aspect of our whole approach to risk. And I think when we come to thinking bolder, I think that also means how we bring our diversity of people into the room. And that's not just a diversity of different organisations, it's youth all the way up to our elderly, it's our First Nations communities, it's our migrant communities, it's diversity of skills and expertise. So it's that we can be appreciating all those various systems which are essentially always at risk. And I think from an NHRA perspective, that's why, and we continue to do so, have an ambition about broadening and further diversity of the participants in our centre, so that we're working with the most impactful organisations to deliver on our vision and mission.
And if I can just extend on that question, Brendan, I think this is what your point was going to. We talk about collaboration a lot. I mean, is collaboration in a federated model reality, and are national approaches a reality?
Absolutely, Iain. And we have a number of platforms at a national level, at a senior at a senior officials level, but we then cascade that all the way through to local partnerships, so with local communities. And I think you've got to take that approach, so you get that clear line of sight from a local level all the way through to the national level. But importantly, I think many of the reviews, Royal Commissions, those sorts of things have clearly outlined that we need to take that locally led approach here. But we need to recognise if we're going to take that approach, because words are cheap, if you don't resource it, if you don't listen, and importantly, if you don't act, then you lose trust. And part of our role in government is not only resourcing in terms of dollars, not only structuring policy, but it's also about bringing capability. It's about bringing human capability to solve some of those problems. They're some of the big challenges that I think we'll be confronted with over the coming years. And, you know, I use as an example now, if we look at Australia-wide, we've got roughly 450 of our 535 local government areas in some shape or form in recovery. And they are stretched. And the people that we are relying on now to inform what we need to be doing, and that informing that connection and taking that time out of their response recovery role and thinking about what that community's priorities are in the medium and long term, here's our huge challenge about how we actually resource that. And I see AFAC in the room here as well. And I look at the work that they're doing with those communities, at capability within their systems, but importantly in the Pacific as well. We have enormous capability, we have enormous experience and expertise here. Our real challenge here is these events becoming more and more frequent, how it drains that capability, and what are the big ideas to give us the freedom to start to deal with the big challenges into the future. That's what we're really looking for.
And just to touch on the federated model as well, and you would have noted when I presented, I paused and said again national systems. So locally driven but supported by national systems. So when we think about innovation, if you're a commercial business and you want to build something in disaster management here in Australia, you just want to have one product and sell it 8 times, right, from a business perspective. But given our federated system and not necessarily having so many national systems in our capability framework, it essentially means that a business needs to build 8 different products and sell them each one time, which is a significant inhibitor to seeing that public-private partnership and that innovation come through. And the same with research. You know, when researchers are building solutions, that they're having to tailor it to a specific jurisdiction rather than across the nation as well. So there's certainly benefits there when we're thinking bolder about national approaches and how we bring those about.
Thanks both. I think this question, whilst it's addressed to NHRA, Brendan, you'll certainly have some input. Disasters disproportionately impact women, children, remote rural people with disabilities, less educated, poor and Indigenous people. How is NHRA proactively addressing this intersectionality of these aspects in its work?
You know, great question. And you will see, if you have read, if not, pick up a copy out the front of our biennial research plan, and that will be renewed and endorsed by our board, but with the similar theme in there by June this year. You will see in there that we have a key theme around social equity. And you'll see that in our work, particularly our social research program of work, we are picking that up. We've got a specific focus on First Nations communities. We've got a fantastic project being led by Monash out of Biami Williamson as well around First Nations disaster resilience. We just held a short workshop upstairs this morning, which will have a continual conversation around First Nations research, also the scholarship I mentioned and future fellowship in that space. I see it as part of the fabric of the landscape of which NHRA continually works upon. And it's also, again, the diversity of our participants, that we have participants specialising in the areas of social equity. For example, organisations such as Red Cross, our whole of government partnership with the Northern Territory Government, which means that we can leverage expertise out of social services and health as well. So as much as you might see and say, can we do more in that space, we certainly welcome research concepts to do more in the social equity space and to be addressing some of those fundamental stresses throughout our society that ultimately make our disaster risk worse.
If I can add to that, that was the clear message from moving throughout Australia during the most, after the 3 years of flooding that we've just experienced, also bushfire impacted communities, those that had also been impacted by cyclones. And as you moved amongst those communities, and I think I touched on it in my presentation, was accessibility and equity is markedly different depending on where you live in Australia. And that's not a situation that can continue. We will get an opportunity, and I recognise I have some of my state colleagues here, we will get an opportunity in the coming 18 months to actually look at the structure of how we resource support in the immediate aftermath of disasters for the most vulnerable in the community. We're currently working with the University of New England to actually start to work on resilience indices. It is University of New England, Joe, I hope?
Yes.
I think it is, yes. So we're starting to take this into account, and as we design what support is available for the most disadvantaged communities, but also for the most resilient of communities and the most adaptable of communities, the question that we will put to our state colleagues and all of us who are designing that is it fit for purpose for the diverse nature of Australian communities? And it's fair to say the structure and the design of how we support those communities hasn't changed for the last decade. And what is clear, it needs to change.
Thank you. Now we'll test our runners in the room. Any questions from within the room? Hands? Simon.
Andrew, you mentioned the importance of having national systems and the efficiency that we got by doing those. Often we get researchers produce things and that sits on their computer, but then that path to turning that from that research computer into operationalising it and supporting and sustaining national systems. We've got some systems that have been developed through great research, and I think maybe, Brendan, this is from the Commonwealth side of things, that leadership from the Commonwealth in supporting national systems like smoke plume modelling, fire behaviour modelling, that are really sort of struggling to just find their feet at the moment.
I'll take the first part of the question and then hand to Brendan. So there's some good examples there of great systems that were built, for example, in the Bushfire Natural Hazard CRC that we've continued to hold on to. One of the key things that we've been doing is trying to find good logical homes for them such that they are continued in their use. An example that Brendan just mentioned is the work that we're doing around the Resilience Index work with NEMA at the moment to further that as a national system, data set, call it what you want. Some of the work too that we're doing with some of the ANU work to further that into GA, for example. But it's also about a change in thinking. So with a user-driven model, making sure that these discussions about, to the degree that it's possible as well, that these discussions are happening up front. So there's a vision around where the research is actually going to lead to. That collaboration and the buy-in by the users in terms of its progression as a research, but also ultimately its use. And then ultimately, when we do have usable research outputs, the ownership of those, investing ownership back into the end user community such that they have a life beyond just the research project and the investment. And
we recognise the impetus that the Commonwealth can provide here. We have a number of huge technological programs in development that have been demonstrated overseas, have real applicability in our space. National messaging system, public sector mobile broadband. These are technologies that have been rolled out throughout the rest of the globe. What we can do, though, is start to learn the lessons of what's happened overseas and start to resource the actual implementation of those systems here in Australia. There's a lot of new stuff going on around the world, but there's also a lot of good stuff where we have the opportunity to learn the lessons of what's been done overseas. And I go to the National Risk Profile for an example. We can provide that convening mechanism to bring all the states together, to bring all the communities together and start to prioritise that work. The real challenge for us is what has happened historically in some cases, is it's founded on a conversation around money. Who's paying for what? But I think this is the real role for the NHRA. If we can make the case, the indisputable case of why this is necessary to take this case, the conversations and the hiccups around money, they fall away. and we start to make the case about why this is important, what are the outcomes we're actually achieving for our community. If we can move away from conversations and negotiations about money and talk about outcomes for our community, I think that's essential. And I think that's what we are starting to work on at the Commonwealth level now, is bringing people together and talking about what are the important outcomes for our communities.
Thank you. There was another question just behind.
It's really a question for Andrew. I'm just a volunteer member of SES, and only a recent one, but I'm also disabled. The recent tests that are being introduced, which you made mention of, don't give me a great deal of confidence, because it's not taking the approach of what you can do, it's taking an approach of what you can't do. I am interested, you mentioned about bioskeleton approaches, which might be a solution in my case, in a sort of way. But is more emphasis going to be put on how disabled people can do things, and this approach of what they can do, not what they can't do?
Look, I think absolutely, and just for your background too, I spent 2 years working in disability in the New South Wales government, so I fundamentally agree with the premise that all people need to be able to have the opportunity to lead their best lives. So I can't unfortunately talk to the implementation of the research and the way it's being done in South Australia. I'm sure that there's some South Australian leaders in the room that could talk to that in due course across the week. But in terms of these bigger, bolder thinking, and I think having that premise that all Australians deserve the right to lead their best life, certainly when we think about the technological solutions that are already being played with and developed in the disability space, and how they can be brought into more mainstream to help our emergency response workers, for example. A lot of this is innovation, and Rob Webb knows that I text him at all sorts of times of day with different ideas, but one of the ones just recently which we were talking about is I went to an agricultural show just recently and just saw some of the innovation in the ag sector that was happening around aerial drones, and I was like, it's not going to be too long until you get this innovation in the ag sector coming into the EM space. And I suppose as the EM sector, I'd probably suggest that sometimes the EM sector can be early adopters. Certainly saw that with things like social media during the Queensland floods back a decade ago, which is great. But sometimes we're late adopters, and the opportunity there, though, is to see what research and innovation is happening in other sectors and how it can translate into the sector. But certainly I'm all with you about opportunities for disabilities within emergency services and more broadly in the community.
Thank you. Others in the room? Let me go back to the screen then. There is a 15-to-1 benefit cost ratio for risk reduction, and 93, although Brendan, you now tell us it's 87, which is great news, go to response and recovery. What does NHRA leadership think is an optimal investment approach? Brendan, this will come to you as well. To pre-post event focused work, and what are the key enablers and or barriers?
Well, I think it's nice that you've directed that one to me. I think Brendan said it himself, and Brendan obviously didn't give a ratio, but Brendan clearly said we need more money going into disaster risk reduction. So that clearly says that, from a Commonwealth perspective, the ratio should be lower than the 87% that Brendan articulated. It's probably a good research question. It probably obviously varies depending upon hazard and community as well. But ultimately, we all know in this room that all disasters are local. All disasters take a local integrated approach to mitigation investments in terms of what investments are most suitable to them. I think the insurance sector would obviously also have a view about how much mitigation and in what communities is necessary to make sure that insurance is a fundamentally sustainable product that we can all be reliant on into the future to maintain our financial resilience as communities as well. But I think fundamentally, certainly from an NHRA perspective, and also from the research evidence that NHRA has collected, not only in its being but also in previous entities, certainly supports the need for further mitigation expenditure in that manner.
I think the big danger here is that the conversation is that the bucket's limited, is that if we're going to increase our investment in resilience and in risk reduction, we take it out of the recovery and the relief bucket. And I think that is extraordinarily dangerous. You still require and you still must accept our climate has changed. We live in a really active part of the South Pacific from a climatic perspective. We will have big climate events, climate-driven events here in Australia. We will need to recover. We need to have a safety net in place for our most vulnerable populations and also even for large, well-developed, well-resourced metropolitan areas, and we've seen that most recently. But I think what's also important too is that individual communities will have a whole list of priorities. They will clearly understand their priorities that I won't understand while I sit in Canberra. And I think what's important is that we have a system that actually looks at what their priorities are, we listen to them, and we start to prioritise investment in them. But we also start to map out what does the future look for those particular communities, because I think that's missing from the conversation. And back to my earlier comments during my presentation, let's not just get completely engaged in fighting the last battle. Let's start looking over the horizon a little bit. And we need those insights from yourselves and from the communities that you work to start to guide that investment. And as I said, sometimes it comes down to decisions about how do we actually allocate resources here. I think there's plenty of money being thrown at this issue. It's just about the choices we're being made and about enabling delivery of a lot of the programs and the projects that are actually in the pipeline have been fully funded. We just need that human capability to deliver on them, and importantly then to measure the outcomes. Because one of the key questions that we get asked after each big event when we're being asked to fund something, the big question coming from the big central agencies, Treasury and Finance, is what's the return of investment on this? And the data is sparse, guys. It really is. We can talk about isolated pockets, Queensland, Western Australia, those sorts of things, but a real understanding in the Australian context. What is investment in building community resilience? What does it mean? What's the investment in structural resilience, structural mitigations? What does it mean for a community? And until we can answer those, you're going to get reluctance and reticence. We can't move quickly to make those decisions. And there's some of the challenges that we're seeing. As you saw that picture of Australia there. And our big challenge is optimising the outcomes with a limited budget. And that's what we need to deliver and focus on.
And Brendan, would it be fair to say, sadly, that even with enhanced investment and more informed decision-making, with a changing climate, it probably won't drive down the cost of recovery in the long run?
I think you're right, Ian. And sometimes too, we talk about looking over the horizon, but we've still got to deal with legacy risk. And I think everyone understands that. Sort of, if we look at the last 200 years that you and I have been here in Australia, not discounting our Aboriginal Torres Strait Islanders here, and you look at where we've settled, where we continue to settle, dealing with those decisions that have been made 200 years ago and for the last 200 years, and optimising, okay, then how do we deal with legacy, but also at the same time, how do we make informed decisions from an investment perspective, from a policy perspective, and building future capabilities at all levels of our society? How do we prioritise those? And I'm looking to you, Ian, for some of those solutions.
The answers are here. We're going to take one more question and then I'll let the panellists free. And it leads a good lead on from that. The condition of the landscape plays a primary role in the risk of disaster. What role does maintaining and caring for a healthy and actively managed landscape play in disaster risk reduction?
Great, I'll take this one. Well, I think absolutely critical. both from a First Nations perspective and more broadly from where we take from a nature-based solutions perspective, which at the end of the day is just completely intertwined in terms of the way of thinking about it. I actually see significant opportunities, not only to invest more in First Nations approaches to land management and cultural management in that space, but also in terms of the opportunities which are being created through nature markets, through biodiversity targets, etc. Perhaps not straight away, but as those evolve over time, and certainly as there's more commercial focus on disclosures around how our biggest companies around the globe and Australia are impacting nature and how we can be directing both government and private efforts into restoring nature, restoring country, caring for country through nature-based solutions. We're starting to do some work in our research program about it. You would have noticed in the Beheaded Ready report, we do call out nature-based solutions within there. But going to Brendan's last point, one of the major inhibitors in terms of investment, and I'd have to say Australia is probably lagging the world, particularly in its conversations and implementations of nature-based solutions. But one of the inhibitors that we particularly see is the way that we are valuing nature-based solutions, and therefore if we are not valuing them very well and identifying their benefits, we are not with the right data and tools to be effectively investing in them on a wider scale.
Yeah, we certainly do need to evolve our understanding of the impact of the environment and also our interventions on the environment and what those impacts are in terms of the resilience and the ability of our communities to not only respond and recover but also adapt to that changing environment. I look overseas at what's going on and the importance those nature-based solutions have as part of the international frameworks in terms of building resilience. And I think we still have a way to go in Australia in terms of evolving our thinking and also our approach. But that work has started. And I think that there is, it's very fertile ground, certainly for many of those in the room to start to inform the trajectory we take here in Australia. Yes, we can learn many lessons from overseas experience, but once again, I recognise the unique environment and also the communities that we work with here in Australia, and I think there's some important lessons there.
Thank you. Would you please all join with me in thanking Brendan and Andrew? I promise I will let you loose in about 30 seconds. Afternoon tea will be served just outside the hall. If I can ask everyone to be back promptly for a 3:30 start. The chair of the next session. It's very pleasing to welcome Professor Cheryl Desha, who will chair the next one. Welcome in more ways than one. Cheryl is about to take up position as our new Science and Innovation Director at NHRA at the end of this month, beginning of next month. Double whammy for me. I work with her at Griffith University on a day-to-day basis, so I will lose that, but gain her in this role, so I think I'm really happy about that. She comes with from a position of Professor of Resilient Infrastructure in Communities, but just that conversation there where we're talking about nature-based solutions, about digital twins, these are things that are passionate and part of Cheryl's daily vocabulary that she will bring, and I'm sure she's picked up a lot from that session. And she will drive the next session of big thinking and innovation in our sector. I invite you to afternoon tea and ask you to be back at 3:30, please. Thank you very much.
Okay, we will get started in about 15 seconds. Doug, I usually call you out to sit down because you will not stop talking, but you're actually nicely seated, ready to get going, perfectly on time. Well done, Doug. All right. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Cheryl Desha. I come to this conference from Meanjin, Brisbane in Queensland, and my work and play is around the Yagara Turrbal country. And I acknowledge our elders past, present and emerging, and Cliffy's beautiful welcome to country today. What struck me this morning was as we walked into the room, no matter where we've come from, we share the same smoke. And sharing the same smoke for me took me to another place, because I say I am from Meanjin today. Actually, my mum's Welsh, my dad's Indian. I was born in Mauritius, spent a fair bit of time in Japan, and here I am in Australia. And actually, most of the time, my head is somewhere out at the moon, looking in on the planet, going, you are a very tiny piece of rock, hanging in a really vast amount of space, with a lot of people counting on your systems to breathe, to eat, and frankly, to have a good time. Because on average, not many of us go past 100 years. So we are here for a short period, and what we do with it is up to our imagining. So when Andrew said, Cheryl, how do you feel about moderating the first panel in the afternoon on thinking big and imagining? I think he said it with a little bit of caution because he didn't know what he was unleashing, but I have Varna here to also keep me in check, so please do that, Varna. So our session today to kick off the conference is around big thinking and innovation in the sector. Big thinking doesn't have to be new thinking, right? It's big thinking about how we deal with the challenges of today and tomorrow, considering the importance of science and research and critical thinking, as Brendan shared this morning, as our national capability, in addition to the other ones that we state, to grow, nurture, and resource those activities into the future. So those words really struck a chord with me for this afternoon, thinking about availability of what we have, accessibility of what we have, and equity as being some real drivers of conversation. Andrew asked us to have a serious go. I thought that was a great cause to head off with, Andrew, at imagining across the forum program about how we can strive to be ready. So that's being ahead of ready, yes? Tick in the box for me, Andrew. I got that one in there. So your program, the booklet in front of you is very important. It's your study guide. There will be a test at the end, multiple choice tests for those online. No, just kidding. No tests today. But please do read it as we go through the conversation. How do we be ready for disasters while holding a steady eye on the horizon? Or, as Brendan said, slightly over the horizon. One that the UN put forward with keeping the eye on the Sendai framework for disaster risk reduction, as well as keeping an eye on the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. These are those global calls to action and global languaging of the problems and the opportunities that we sit within the context today. So a few pieces that I took from the Q&A session. John, you asked for a systemic disaster risk approach and where that's appearing in our advancements in systems thinking. That appeals to me. I love biomimicry. I'm an environmental engineer. And our panellists, I think, love that topic area too, so we'll see where we go. And a flexible approach that addresses communities' experiences across Australia, fit for purpose. So, as we keep accessibility and equity front in mind, I would like to introduce our first of 4 panellists. We're going to have 15 minutes per panellist. They'll come up to the lectern, so you can all relax, read your materials, and study hard. And at the end of those 4, we'll then break into a conversation space over here. So the 2 hours are nicely partitioned. Probably while we do that, you can all stand up and have a quick stretch break because that'll keep us all interested and engaged. So to introduce Sue, and Sue, if you can come up while I'm introducing, that'd be great. Dr. Sue Keay is a partner and director at Future Work Group and a renowned leader in robotics, artificial intelligence, AI, and automation. Sue's accolades reflect her strengths in leading technology, ambitious enterprises, and advocating for diversity in the tech industry. Sue set up the world's first Robotic Vision Research Centre, the Australian Centre for Robotic Vision. And she sits on a range of advisory boards, nationally and internationally, in the robotics, AI and emerging tech space, helping people understand what the possibilities are. I can't wait to hear your presentation, Sue.
Imagine a world where AI and robotics works seamlessly alongside humans, not only to enhance our response to disasters, but also to predict and even prevent those disasters from happening, or at least minimising the harm that they might engender. This is the future that we are heading towards. So I know some stuff about robotics and AI, but I don't really know a lot about emergency management. But I am from Queensland, and so I can predict, based on the difficulty that I have getting home insurance, that we're going to be needing a lot more emergency management in the future. So today I'm going to tell you a bit about where robotics and AI are now, how robotics and AI are being applied in areas that are relevant to emergency management, and then speculate a bit about where that technology is looking to be heading in the future. So raise your hand if you have tried ChatGPT. Okay? Keep your hand up if you use ChatGPT every day. Now stay with me if you were one of the 1 million people who used ChatGPT within the first 5 days of its release. Ooh, some people have their hands up. Okay, so I think this graph really illustrates the speed with which we are now starting to take up new technologies. And it's led many people to believe that we're really getting to a tipping point in AI and robotics. So while the world's first computer, the ENIAC, actually weighed 30 tonnes and took up several rooms worth of space, you know, we now carry more processing power in phones that weigh less than 200 grams and which can additionally be used as wireless hotspots and mobile sensors. They can record voices, take photos, they can check where you're going, they can measure distances. You can even cough into your mobile phone and artificial intelligence can diagnose what respiratory illness you have. So AI is far more than just ChatGPT. It is fundamentally about having machines that can predict the immediate future with high accuracy and make decisions that make sense to us as humans. Now, the physical manifestation of artificial intelligence is robots. So who saw a robot on their way to the conference today? Anybody? Oh, okay, well, don't be too sad, because in the near future you will be seeing robots. Robots and AI have actually been around for more than 70 years, but unfortunately you probably don't see them very commonly. And that's because the first robots to be developed were industrial robots. These tend to be robots that are fixed in place, that are very good at repetitive tasks, but are fundamentally unsafe for humans to be around because they cannot modify their behaviours, and so we keep them locked up in cages. Over the last 30 years, though, thanks to artificial intelligence, we've now seen the emergence of robots that are mobile, that can operate in the air, on land, underwater. And these robots make decisions in real time, using information that they're collecting from cameras and other sensors. They do not need to be caged, and they can operate in the dynamic, unstructured environments that we humans call our workplaces and our homes. So in the future, these robots are likely to play a much more active role in our lives, and they will be interacting not only with us, but also with one another. While it may take a robot robot evolution has sped up dramatically due to the application of a type of artificial intelligence that we call deep learning. Deep learning is a form of machine learning that teaches machines to recognise patterns and to make decisions in ways that are similar to how humans learn from experience. So in the past, if you wanted a robot to do something, then you would have to write lines and lines of code so that you could guide the robot no matter what type of obstacle it would encounter in its path. However, nowadays robots can learn, like the robot in this picture, by observing what humans do. In this case, the human is demonstrating how the robot can grasp a ball. So in this way, robots are starting to learn very much like human children, often by watching YouTube videos. And that leads us to the big advantage that robots and AI have over people. While it may take a robot thousands of hours to learn something that we humans consider pretty simple, like recognising a cat, unlike humans, once a robot learns something, it can transfer that knowledge to all other robots. So does anyone in the audience have teenage children? Yeah, me too, I sympathise. I mean, imagine if you could transfer all of your knowledge, in particular the mistakes that you made as a teenager that you're seriously hoping your own teenager does not make as well, and just transfer that knowledge directly to your teenager. Well, that's exactly what robots can do. And if the learnings of one robot can transfer to many, what it means is that we can achieve scale and direct a large number of robots to solving a single problem. And if we want to preserve sustainable, healthy natural landscapes, then we certainly need scale on our side. One opportunity that we missed 5 years ago during the Black Summer bushfires was a deep understanding of our environment through pervasive sensing. We don't know how many plants and animals were lost during those fires because we didn't have the technology to thoroughly survey the environment that is now gone. With the evolution of new sensors and mobile robot platforms, in the future we can hope to have a much better understanding of biodiversity. Such pervasive sensing will also help us to track hazards, to make better and faster decisions. They can even act as mobile communications networks. And we're already tracking natural disasters and incidents via social media, as we've already heard today. Harnessing the power of the data collected from mobile devices, whether they be carried by robots or humans, is going to become increasingly important in the future. Experiments in response robotics in mass casualty events by Purdue University have shown that AI and robotics can be used to identify victims, interact with them, assess the severity of their injuries, and communicate their details and location to first responders. Artificial intelligence classifies the patient's acuity level and achieves 74% accuracy, and actually is able to get to 99% accuracy in determining level 1 acuity. So why not go one step further and use bystanders as a resource? By having artificial intelligence help them to collect information that will help determine resource allocation. Bystanders are likely to be much more active participants in emergency response if they're given the tools to meaningfully contribute. And if we consider bystanders as a potential additional resource, we also need to leverage artificial intelligence to ensure that we can train up the future emergency management workforce. Like many occupations, I'm sure that in emergency management you're probably facing a situation where a lot of experienced emergency personnel are likely to be retiring in the near future. And of course, when they leave the workforce, they take a lot of valuable knowledge and experience with them. There are actually a number of AI tools that can be used to capture this expert knowledge, which may be as simple as recording procedures on a mobile phone or GoPro, then codifying that information and adding it to a corpus. So not only can this knowledge now be used to train AI models that are internal to your organisation, it can significantly speed up the training of both your permanent and your contingent workforce. Just-in-time training ensures people have the knowledge they require when they require it, and that it can be accessed anywhere and in real time. So you can probably imagine a number of scenarios where a combination of robots working with other robots or robots working with humans would probably be helpful in emergency management. In dangerous situations, robots can supply situational awareness while ensuring that humans remain a safe distance away. They can also perform a variety of tasks, from firefighting and search and rescue operations to rapid impact assessment and the delivery of emergency relief. AI has meant that you no longer have to code to be able to direct robots what to do. In this image, you can see a human directing a robot with verbal instructions. Thanks to thousands of hours of training to develop large language models such as the ones behind ChatGPT, the robot can decipher what the human wants using natural language processing. A number of studies suggest that teams consisting of robots and humans consistently outperform teams that are made up of robots alone or only of people. There's another reason that human and robots need to work together though, and that is because it's sometimes humans that need to rescue the robot as opposed to the other way around. So you're probably thinking, does that mean these technologies are reliable enough for use in emergency management? And I'd have to say, well, arguably not, at least not if you expect them to be fully autonomous. But robots and drones can be invaluable in collecting information in areas where it is too dangerous to send people in. And so even if at the moment you are still needing a person to control the robot remotely and occasionally go and retrieve it, at least you are still able to keep that person out of harm's way. And the great thing about robots is that they are not human. And so if we do lose one in a hazardous environment, well, that's okay. Even in relatively safe environments, it can often be helpful to have robots. So during COVID, Queensland Health set up telehealth facilities to bring treatment closer to patients who lived in remote communities. So here we have a human sonographer in Brisbane using a robot to conduct ultrasound. In this example, the condition of the patient's heart is being assessed. An extension of this, as robots become more functionally useful, would be additional remote interventions or even surgery. AI and robotics is now allowing many activities to occur closer to the source, be that medical diagnosis, treatment, firefighting, or any tactical response to an immediate threat or crisis. So you're probably thinking, that's great. Robots and AI are finally getting to the point that they are almost useful. But how can emergency management coordinate both a human and a robot workforce? Because you're probably going to need a lot of them. I've never been to any emergency services centres, but I assume that coordination is your specialty. What I am familiar with are remote operations centres in the mining sector, and my observation would be that it's best to plan for autonomy early and think about how you can coordinate robot and drone assets for a range of different purposes. So in this image, you can see the Chula Vista Police Department's Drone Operations Centre. At the moment, they're only coordinating drones that fly in the city within a fixed perimeter. They're launched from rooftop launch pads, like the Google Wing launch pads that are also pictured that are up in Brisbane. These centres also need to consider how they would manage long-range drones, such as the one pictured here that delivers pharmaceutical supplies in regional Queensland in Gundawindi. They also need to consider how they control mobile ground robots, like this firefighting robot that is used on Rio Tinto mine sites. It's not too early to start planning for the extra coordination that is going to be required from these remote-controlled or, in the future, autonomous assets as they're brought online. So I can only speculate on what an emergency management centre of the future is going to look like. My main advice for emergency managers is not to reinvent the wheel. Australia has great remote operations capability, both in the mining and the space sector, where large-scale autonomous machines are operated reliably from thousands of kilometres away, day after day, year after year. Coordination between humans and machines is still very much a work in progress, but it will need to happen. And this is where potentially emergency managers can lead the way. AI allows much more distributed decision-making on the edge rather than centralised control, which is going to challenge the way that you currently do things. It's worth thinking about how you can trial new technology, sharing the risk with technology partners and with outside organisations from different sectors. This is probably likely to be the fastest path to innovation. But you may need to completely rethink your structure and your processes, which is going to be quite painful if you want to reap the benefits of this new technology. So really the future is in your hands. While it may be shaped by forces outside of your control, AI and robotics will significantly increase your capacity to respond to natural disasters and incidents at scale. Many people in robotics think that the philosopher Descartes actually has got things the wrong way around. So Descartes said, "I think, therefore I am." But in the case of robots, it's probably more true to say they are, therefore they think. If you're impressed by some of the parlour tricks that you can see in generative AI like ChatGPT, then you're going to need to brace yourself for the fundamental shift that will occur in the future when robots start to develop large behaviour models. I mentioned that robots can learn, like humans, from watching YouTube videos, but with video we can only see and hear it. We can't smell, taste or touch video. And just as you can't learn to be a professional football player from watching TV, you actually need to go out and kick a ball, it's very much the true with robots. Robots need to interact with the physical world, sensing their environment, collecting data, learning how to execute tasks through various behaviours. And as the data and behaviours are collected and fed back to refine AI models, then we're going to start to see the true power of these technologies. And robots will start to become, hopefully, somewhat useful. And we humans really need to start planning for that day. The future is already here, it's just unevenly distributed. Many of the tools to use AI and robots in emergency management already exist or are in development. So it's a matter of harnessing them and reshaping processes and structure to use these tools to best effect. We're seeing a rapid increase in funding for the development of humanoid robots, which, like the investment in self-driving cars which has preceded it, will translate into a number of technological advances that we probably can't even predict at this stage. The future is going to need to be met with flexibility and adaptability, and figuring out how that can happen in a traditional rules-based hierarchical structure, I believe, is probably one of the key challenges that emergency managers will face in the future. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sue. Whew. Okay. I have an admission to make, apart from the fact that, yes, I am wearing a moon boot. Thank you, technology, for enabling me to be here without crutches. I really don't like change. I hung out in the academic sector for 20 years, to the month, and it's taken a bit of a kick and a shove and colleagues saying have a go to do something differently. And as I'm watching your presentation, Sue, I'm thinking, all those things start going off in my head, those little voices. When you say it's about needing to share risk differently, oh yes, of course. Oh, it's about rethinking structures and processes. Oh, you know, the neck starts doing a little tick. Big ideas and translating them into reality, given that they're probably not new and they're probably just, I love it, unevenly distributed. What do we do about this thing called change when, as human beings, we kind of like things to stay the same? Well, I'm a big fan of Star Wars, and Yoda keeps telling me, there is no try, just do or don't do. Okay, right, so we're going to move on to Justin now. He kind of says it like that. No? Did I misquote Yoda? I'll be part of my performance review. Sorry, Andrew. Right, so moving on. Don't really like change. I really love cafes and I really love coffees and I really love catching up with people at cafes with coffee. Serviettes are so fantastic. I also love James Bond, and I love all those movies where the serviette magically disappears in the glass of water, so there's no trace of the conversation. I keep my serviettes, so I've been writing some today because that was inspiring, Justin, and I got lots of acronyms, and so my serviettes looking slightly, starting to look like a mind map, but probably the illustrator will find a better way of doing this later on. What occurred to me that in this interaction between teleoperation and supervisory control and that handover period, well, that's fraught with problems, isn't it, in terms of being able to manage that risk, particularly when we're sitting there as people trying to engage with change and realising that it's a changing environment. Is that impossible? Are we just talking around a context that's actually not possible to do? I wonder, because Andrew's challenged us today to imagine it being possible that we're sitting as decision makers of ourselves and of others in a changing environment, managing the need to change our systems and the way we do things with technology. So I just wanted to acknowledge between these two speakers, the challenge is real. Like, that's a big task, really? On top of the day job, on top of all the things that you have to do for your annual performance review, etc., there's this big idea/translation to deal with those challenges. So now we move on to our next speaker in this dialogue around change and all things big thinking. And our next speaker is Prof Andy Koronios. And Andy, if you're able to head up to the mic as I'm introducing, that would be wonderful. So Andy joins us today as the CEO and Managing Director of SmartSat CRC. Perhaps a number of you already know Andy quite well. It's a consortium of industry and research organisations that are developing groundbreaking satellite technologies to catapult Australia into the global space economy. Now, Andy, I know those words sound great. I also know that it wasn't until very recently that Australia even owned a satellite. So this is a rapidly changing environment for our feds. And there's also a bit of history that you might share with us at some point there, because Australia was a leader in the early days around satellites. Andy led the establishment of several research labs, and he's a professor of information systems. At the forum today, he's going to discuss with us research and innovation from that context in addressing the challenges in front of us. Thank you, Andy.
Thank you very much for the opportunity to speak to you, and sincere congratulations on organising a wonderful program from what I've seen and what I've heard so far. Brilliant speakers, Andrew, well done. And I love the report. I think Be Ahead of Ready is fantastic. So thank you for the opportunity for me to share some ideas with you about the criticality of space and space technologies. I don't have access to this, but I'll turn around to actually basically control the slides. I think your objectives are pretty clear, and I'm sure you know it. And they were mentioned already today, particularly around evidence-based, data-informed decision-making. That is so critical for first responders and emergency management personnel. But it's also very important to share information, to be able to actually identify the risks and then share the information with the potential recipients of a disaster or the problems that may occur. Of course, once you have that information, you want to respond to the disaster and optimize the logistics, optimize your resources, because you don't have a lot. I am certain of that. Most of us would want to have far more than that. And it was also mentioned many times today, situational awareness is critical. Understanding what is happening in the staging post or in the front of the disaster, but being a way to be able to control and to command and to coordinate the activities. So all of those are very, very important objectives. I asked the question, do you have all of that already? I think from what we've discussed and what I've seen lately, I'm certain that technology can actually help you with that. And the previous speakers have actually already gave us some really inspirational presentations about the use of technology and the technology that we should be using here in Australia beyond what we are doing at the moment. And it is a big challenge for us because it costs money, it costs resources, but you must think not of the current technology. Think ahead, and Sue and others gave us some brilliant examples of what is coming, what is ahead in terms of technology. I think for us it's very, very important to be able to leverage technology for emergency management. I'm not certain whether you're doing it to the extent that is possible. And certainly I know that you could do a lot more for space technologies, and that is really what I'm going to focus on. We've had the service of satellites for the past 60-odd years, from Sputnik to today. But they've served us very well, and they've served emergency management very well. Firefighters, for instance, would not have the great heat-resistant suits that they have if it wasn't for space. Nor would they have the air tanks. The air tanks are a NASA Apollo mission technology result that we are using at the moment. And there are thousands of those, not just one or two, thousands of those applications that you're using every day. Of course, you take them for granted. When you go and pay, I guess coffee was cheap today, but if you go and get your latte from a coffee shop, you really could not do that and pay the current way without cash unless it was for satellites. It is satellites that drive our world from the time that you open your eyes, even before that, because no doubt you got your iPhone to wake you up. We had last November, last November, we've lost the Optus carrier for some time. It affected 10 million people. It affected hospitals. It affected transportation systems. And that was only one carrier. Imagine if you lost all of the GNSSs, not just GPS, but all of them. And all of the mobile carriers will come to a standstill. Air transportation would not exist, and many, many other services. In fact, it would be chaos, total chaos for us. So I think it is important for us to appreciate it, but also to leverage the technology that exists, the space technology that exists. And in the past, of course, it was only a few countries, even though, I think that's what you're waiting for, even though Australia was the third nation on Earth to design, build, and launch a satellite, the third nation on Earth. And you know what? That was the RESAT satellite, in fact, DSTG result, together with the Adelaide University. But actually, there was also another one called Oscar 5. And it's the only satellite, very close apart. In fact, they were competing who was going to launch first. And it's the only satellite ever built that it was held together by bed strings and sticky tape. To actually, because they only had a budget of $600, to be able to actually push the antennas out for it to operate, they used bed springs and sticky tape. But don't get fooled by the $600. Those big satellites that you're using for instance, firefighting, the Himawari, for weather as well, and other satellites like that, they take 5 or 10 years to design. They cost $500 million to actually build and launch. And they last for about 15 years, if you're lucky. Not many countries and only a few mega companies could actually do that until recently. And it's because of the miniaturization of electronics. It's because of basically the same as your mobile phone. Why do you have a mobile phone? When I was very young, I am still young, but when I was very young, my first mobile phone was pretty big. And my first camera was, I think, 1.5 megapixels. Your iPhone 15 is, I believe, 48 megapixels. And you can get a camera now 400 megapixels. So all of that miniaturization of electronics means that it's become much cheaper. Cheaper means that countries like Australia can actually build their own satellites. So there is no reason why we here in Australia could not have a satellite, because until now, until recently anyway, we could not take a selfie of ourselves. We always relied on other people's data. That is changed, and it's changing very fast. And that is because of what we call in the industry Space 2.0. Some really big technologies there's a confluence of technologies, and we heard Justin talk about quantum. Very important technology, particularly in the next 20 or 30 years. We spoke of robotics, AI. All of that is going to become commonplace. It's almost commonplace, but you haven't seen anything yet. But all of those capabilities, the technological capabilities, Australia and emergency management organizations really need to take note of and to adopt and adapt for your own purposes. Because space gives you ubiquitous coverage. You know, you talk about robots. Robots will not work in Thangaminda or somewhere in Western Queensland, Gundawindi. They wouldn't work if you wanted to control them remotely unless you had low latency and high bandwidth communication capabilities. And you only have to go to the hills to see that your current mobile coverage is really not that fantastic. So, but with space technologies, then if there are terrestrial problems, whether communication systems are damaged, whether the mobile network is down because it's burnt or because the batteries were flat, because eventually they do, you don't have that ability to actually communicate with people and actually have what we call control and command of the issue. So there are some capabilities here, particularly also around open data, AI and data. We are awash with data. We have a lot of data that is actually other people's data, and their governments have deemed that those sets, particularly around remote sensing, will be data that will be open and free for everybody to leverage. We do a great job, and particularly Geoscience Australia is doing a great job with the Digital Earth Australia and so on, but there is much more that can be done. In my view, 3 game-changing space technologies for emergency management. First of all, satellite communications and connectivity. You will find that the data rates will increase significantly. We already are doing work with optical communications, not just radio frequency, but optical communications. That gives you 100x, 100 times more bandwidth and much greater latency, of course, because it is the speed of light. 6G is just around the corner, and that will give you, some of us don't even have 5G, but that will give you a different environment in terms of communication, being real-time, instant, it doesn't matter where you are. And also, of course, a lot of other capabilities, such as PNT, position, navigation, and timing. The GPS that you think. I don't know how many people know, but the Australian government has invested $1.8 billion on augmenting the GPS system, because we in Australia are the lucky ones. Everybody knows of GPS, but there are actually 6 global navigations. Well, actually, there are 4 global navigation satellite systems and another 2 local ones, the Indian and Japan. And Australia can see all of them, which means what is it called? Triangulate. No, hexagulate anyway. Triangulation allows you to correct the signal and be able to actually have not only around 10 meters that GPS gives you now, with very low integrity, by the way. You know, aeroplanes cannot use it, particularly for vertical, landings and so on, but also down to 5 to 10 centimeter augmentation. So that accuracy will be a game-changing for you, because you'll be able to control the robots to the centimetre level, whether it is at the fire front or wherever the disaster is. And of course, Earth observation. Earth observation is a very... My timer has gone. Earth observation is a big area that we are also working on. I'm very far behind. I will give you a plug of what we do. The SmartSat CRC has over 135 organizations. The logos are there. And we have an investment of 270 million. We got 245, but we've grown that. $270 million on R&D for a number of areas in space. And we are working with these partners. In fact, I think Andrew has beaten me. I've got 22 universities, you've got about 40-something. But nonetheless, we have a significant capability and a number of projects which I probably am running out of time to tell you. We have already developed fantastic algorithms, AI, machine learning models, uploaded on satellites, our own satellites, but also others, to be able to do AI processing on board the satellite. Because sometimes you can't wait for all the data to come here and be analyzed down on the ground. You need to actually do some of that from space. And indeed, some of the data is useless. If you're having an optical sensor and you're taking photographs of clouds or the water, what use is that? All it does is burns the bandwidth. We have all-weather, anytime monitoring. I've noticed that, in fact, some firefighting organizations are now using radar, mobile radar. You can actually do SAR from space and LiDAR from space, right? Synthetic aperture radar allows you very, very high reliability and temporal and as well as spatial resolution to be able to see what happens to the structures, to develop digital elevation models, and to actually understand what the damage is, the extent of damage. We have developed, together with our RMIT partners, the BRIGHT algorithm that is already in operation now by DEA. Basically gives you automatic warnings of fires, basically igniting at any place in Australia. That is an operational system, and as I've said, the great work that RMIT and the other colleagues are doing in this area. In fact, many of you would know of the X Prize, right? Between 10 and 100 million. There were hundreds of applications in the wildfire challenge that they put in, right? More than 200 or 300. They selected 20, and 2 of our projects are in that. Is that a red one? Oh, wow. Okay, we won't worry about search and rescue, direct IoT connectivity, the infobody concept, that is a direct technology that could be used for the emergency services communicating with everybody on their home without relying on the mobile system if it's not operational. We are building only 300 meters from here, right? We are building our own satellite with a lot of those capabilities on board, hyperspectral sensors, as well as IoT connectivity and onboard processing. That satellite has already been built, as I said, just in Lot 14. It's been built, zipped, and packaged and sent to SpaceX. It will be launched on the 2nd of July. That will be our first. We're building a lot of the blocks, and many of you are contributing to that. But what is really needed is something that actually integrates and coordinates all of the disparate data sources, all of the actual capabilities into something that will give you a digital twin for emergency management. A true digital twin, not a hyper-physical, cyber-physical system that will allow you to actually understand exactly what is happening and control it. I'm sorry that I've gone over time. Thank you very much. In my 50 years of professional life, I have learned that you cannot achieve anything great until you actually take an uncomfortable risk. So don't think about ROI. Take that risk with technology. right? The overland telegraph would not have been built if people thought about ROI, nor can you put ROI on the Sydney Harbour Bridge or the Opera House. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Andy. Wow. I have an inner space, Cheryl. I'm part of the International Society of Digital Earth, and it is passionate about bringing alive the 20-plus year vision of Al Gore when he declared the possibility of a digital Earth that would give us this amazing, real intelligence about what's going on around us towards the Sustainable Development Goals. I didn't know about the recent building of the satellites literally within half a kilometre of where we sit. That's a bit exciting. Anyway, back into facilitator mode. I'd like to give a shout out to Geosciences Australia because in that long time when we didn't have any of our own satellites, Australia got really good, like first in class at curating data. So we'd take other people's data from other satellites and then create the most amazing knowledge and decision support systems from that data. So really, we really do kick goals in that landscape as well. And I'd like to do a shout out to the Queensland Disaster Research Alliance and particularly to Pat Driscoll, who used the power of the telephone to send me a text message to say, Cheryl, do or do not, there is no try. Thank you, Pat. This is why we have the Alliance, because it's about us supporting each other as we navigate change and bungles. So I really appreciate that. Wonderful. All right, moving to our last provocation before we have a stretch break and a conversation about this fascinating area. We are moving to a reflection and discussion by Brett. So Brett Loughlin joins us today with a bio that is imminently showing on my screen. Here we go. So Brett is the Chief Fire Officer at the South Australian Country Fire Service, and he has had a wide variety of leadership roles in South Australia and New South Wales. He's undertaken operational deployments to pretty large emergency incidents across the country. And I've heard from a number of people, Brett, that you are passionate about what you do every day in preparedness activities and working collaboratively with colleagues in the community to address challenges facing fire and emergency services. Thank you for your contribution. Over to you.
Well, good afternoon. What an intimidating group you all are. The knowledge and the passion in this room is amazing, and I am genuinely nervous to present to you. And if you're nervous to have a fire chief talk to you about innovation, well, that's okay, because things happen very slowly in the fire industry. So 200 years ago, we had the bright idea of maybe putting the water on top of our heads. I'm not entirely sure about the thinking, but in that time, we were very innovative, and we worked out that instead of having the air through the hose, we'll put that in a cylinder. The cylinders that NASA invented, thank you NASA, and we'd changed the gear from sort of rubber and highly flammable PPC, which wasn't a great idea, it turned out, to, again, the gear developed by NASA. So change happens slowly in the fire and emergency services sector. There's a great saying that fire services are 200 years of tradition unimpeded by progress. That is a challenge, and I fully accept it. So to everybody in the room who has tried to engage with us and been frustrated by our inability to perceive or to buy into the amazing research or projects you're doing, please know that I see you, that I appreciate you, and that our whole sector does too. And the reality is we are a bit slow to change because everything in the environment that our people work in is trying to kill them. And that is not an exaggeration. It is a reflection of the dynamic tasks that we ask our fire and emergency service volunteers and career personnel to operate in every single day. And it does then make you pretty risk adverse to adopt new procedures and new changes. And much of what I'm going to talk about is how there's real opportunity for us to make some change and to move ahead and to find some of that efficiency that will allow us to do so that we can serve our communities better in that changed environment. And so you all know about the changing climate. We've heard again and again about how that's increasing the amount of disasters and everything else that comes with it. And my challenge, and I'm pleased that some of my fellow presenters have sort of captured on some of the opportunities in this space, but there's a really real scenario that the modelling suggests in the next 10 to 20 years, where the South Australian Country Fire Service and our partner agencies could be forced to battle fires in the Adelaide Hills on a 50-degree day. And at what point does a chief officer like myself have that moral, ethical and legal obligation to not allow our firefighters to fight the fire in those conditions? And if that happens, what's the alternative? And is it robotics? Is it different PPC and equipment that will enable our firefighters to operate in those high heat conditions for the 12 hours to 14-hour durations that they currently, operate in those environments? Because we can't send people out knowing that we're sending them out to die. That's not an option. And so what does that future look like? And we've already seen the environment in the 1920 season when all our resources were strained across the nation and we struggled to support each other any further, and that was a challenge. And as we've heard, we can't be limited by those previous events. So I'm looking not at that, not at the resource challenge, but at that real risk of at what point do we stop responding to the incidents because it's just no longer safe to do so. And can you imagine what that does to our communities and the resilience conversation and the warning and messaging conversation that goes with that? And so what are some of the operational improvements we can make beyond what we've sort of spoken about? I look at our aerial firefighting as a fantastic example. It is highly effective. It enables us to do incredible things, but it is incredibly dangerous. Almost every single year, without fail, somewhere in the country, an aerial firefighting aircraft crashes, often with the devastating loss of life of the crew. That's not a sustainable model. And now, because of the changing climate and the extreme fire behaviour we observe, we're now trying to go, well, we're going to have to do more of our operations at night. And so now we're trying to put these platforms and our brave people into nighttime scenarios. And it's already hard enough and dangerous enough during the day, let alone putting people on NVGs. There are technological solutions that can solve some of our nighttime issues, and maybe not directly for firefighting at this point, although I am eagerly awaiting the X Prize competition, which is trying to automate aerial firefighting and satellite fire detection, which would be amazing. But at the very least, the technology is there now to enable us to fly drones at night to do the intelligence gathering that we will otherwise have to put people in harm's way to achieve. And that's not sustainable. The technology is the solution. The authorising environment, the regulatory framework, though, isn't there to support that at the moment, nor is the cost ability of agencies to make a purchase of large drones and be able to put them in the air and fly them above our cities and our towns currently. And so that is a challenge for us, but one that we are imminently capable of solving, surely. As well as our operational improvements in the aerial space, we've had a lot of talk about return on investment. We've had a lot of talk about the money that's spent on response and recovery. And by and large, the part that's missed in that is the overwhelming amount of that money is spent in recovery. The response money saves recovery as well, much like the mitigation and the preparation, and we need to own that space and some of those statistics a bit more. Aerial aviation, using an automatic dispatch of aircraft like we do in South Australia to all rural fires when the fire behaviour indices is above a rating of 21 in our primary response zones, returns a 1 to 4.8 return on investment. And what does that look like in practice? It looks like a fire that occurred on the outskirts of a township called Narracourt in the lower southeast a few months ago. And that was a fire that burnt a total of 19 hectares. And that's nothing. It's an inconsequential fire at 19 hectares. It took 3 days in total to put it out, patrol it for a couple of days and to walk away. There were no losses, there were no injuries. That's because we had multiple aircraft support that initial firefighting operation. That's because we had amazing people on the fireground who made great tactical and strategic decisions supported by those aircraft. One of our Black Hawk helicopters attended that incident and dropped 170,000 litres of water on that fire in the space of 3 hours. That's incredible. that stopped a fire that, according to the crew, should have been several hundred hectares, should have burnt down some of the homes that were in the immediate area that were not well prepared and did not have a good understanding of their risk. Should have burnt them down, should have been a devastating incident, and instead it isn't, and it's a great news story and it becomes a footnote in what was otherwise an uneventful fire season. Sometimes the money we spend in response is worthwhile and is really important, and that's important to not lose in the conversation. We've just heard about the amazing data we can gather from satellites, and I'm particularly excited and really proud that that work's happening here in South Australia, and I'm keen to see that develop. But there's ways we can also gather data that we aren't even utilising. In the CFS, I have some 800 fire trucks that are spread across our agency. We have another 600 command vehicles and support vehicles. We have 13,500 of the most talented volunteers you could hope to find anywhere in the world. And we don't automate data collection from any of them. We don't have any sensor suites on our fire trucks that could be detecting and reporting back on the ambient conditions they're operating in. We don't do any of that. And we're talking about how we can push ahead and we can use satellites to capture some of that data. When at a more cost-effective ability, surely there's data that we could pull from the fireground to help us make better informed decisions, better warnings and advice to the community, better understanding of the weather as it impacts and drives major fire behaviour. Surely we can do some of these things, and it's just that we haven't done it yet. And when I think about just the number of fire trucks alone, let alone the vehicles doing flood rescue and flood work and all those other sort of natural hazard responses, it's mind-boggling to think of the data that we are missing. We could build some of this into the PPC worn by our firefighters and get real-time health data and welfare monitoring data, which will help inform us about that 50-degree day and whether it's safe for our people to operate, or how regularly we need to rotate our firefighters to ensure their safety and their well-being. That better data piece is within our reach, and we've just got to get better at understanding the data that we could generate and how we could better utilise it, and then turn that into using our AI and our other systems to be able to weaponise and operationalise that data more and more effectively. Resource management. Here I am about to air our dirty laundry as an industry. The black and white photo is from the CFS headquarters. No, it's not. Okay, that's the Battle of Britain in the 40s. And in terms of evolution and how much we change in the fire service, we took that and we turned it into T-cards, paper-based representations of fire trucks where people record in pen or pencil the names of the crew on that appliance, and then we use hands to move them around from sector to sector, staging area. I mean, that is just staggering. And it's not just the fire service, it's our SES colleagues, it's just the way we do this in emergency management. You can't tell me there aren't people in this room who could solve this problem for us at a national and international scale. And my challenge to you is, please, dear God, solve this problem. I shouldn't have to rely on that. I should know who's on my fire truck. We shouldn't even have to make that a process. That should just be automated. When the crew hop in the truck, that's who's on there. It's reported back to a database. Then I know exactly how many people I'm accommodating, I'm catering. God forbid something happens to a fire truck, I know in real time who was on that appliance and where and how they may be. This is something we can solve that would make a real difference, that would then help us make better informed, more efficient decisions around resource allocation, which is going to be incredibly important in the future as we know. But what if we didn't even need to put the people at risk in the first place? Surely, with our mastery of satellites, of GIS systems, surely we can stop building things in silly places. Surely. And yet we don't. The 2014 productivity report that Brendan mentioned has this great excerpts in there about a development that was approved by the City of Gold Coast Council, no offence Queensland, go Queensland in state of origin, but that was approved that was so high risk, the approval included a helipad, 2 flood boats and a requirement that they must have 2 days' worth of food provisions at all times in the event of an emergency, because the council didn't feel like they could say no. And yet, if we all collectively gather after this and have a drink, I'm pretty sure we could name dozens of other developments that have occurred since 2014 in equally silly places that didn't need to occur, or that could be built elsewhere, or that we just need to have the maturity and the courage to say no to building them in the first place. Because if we keep building things at risk, we're going to have to keep responding to them. We're going to have to keep doing the resilience and the education piece, and we're going to keep failing and falling behind in this space. We can do better in this. We can absolutely do better in this. Now, if they are already there, or if we've built them and we lose the planning argument, then let's at least make it easier for our firefighters and our emergency personnel. Each state and jurisdiction has a version of bushfire risk management planning software that identifies assets at risk, priorities them, assigns mitigation treatments, and then, helps target that. They're not aligned. They're not universal. As was called out, there's no real consistency in there beyond a piece of an international standard that we're aiming for. There is an opportunity for us to risk rate a hospital in Queensland the same as in South Australia, the same as a school in Western Australia, the same as a subdivision in Victoria. There is an opportunity for us to stop this colloquial state-based craziness that we have and actually develop some national systems. And to the point around funding, though, it will require some Commonwealth funding as the leverage, because otherwise the chances of getting all the states and territories to simultaneously, in one budget cycle, get approval for one project, it's nigh on impossible, and it's never going to happen. All of this can come together to make us more efficient. We can find greater efficiency in our resource allocation to incidents. We can use AI to support the triage of multiple incidents. On one day, on the 8th of December last year, we had catastrophic fire danger in 5 districts simultaneously. We had 30,000 lightning strikes recorded in a 24-hour period. A system that can help work out which ones of those lightning strikes are the most critical and are the biggest risk to us, to help us prioritise and treat that, is going to be money worthwhile and well spent in this scenario. In addition, it goes beyond just those big fires. It goes to the day-to-day jobs, the car accidents, the things like that that make up the bread and butter of our responding all over the place, where we can triage and go, the time of day, the busyness on that road means that there's likely to be more cars involved in that response and need a greater weight of response as opposed to a different scenario that could eventuate. We can systematise this in reference to one of the questions earlier. We can use AI to support this, and we can be more efficient. We could also, for the love of God, design one fire truck and use that same design across the country, and maybe even agree on the colour of a fire truck, because you wouldn't want to believe how much variation there is in that space. Don't even get me started. There's opportunity for us to coordinate and find efficiency, and we'll look to you for the research to help us drive that and make those informed decisions. Because what's at stake at the end of the day is people's lives and livelihood. It's a crew in a fire truck who are tired, exhausted, stressed, have probably feared for their life at some point in that 12-hour shift they're doing, and they just want good information to make good decisions so that they can go home safely. And on the other scale is the family who are equally stressed, concerned and fearful, and we've got the obligation to try and protect and help them. Through all the work that you do through NHRA, through ADA, through AFAC, through the response agencies in the room, you all contribute to that, and I'm incredibly grateful. And I look forward to the most exciting period that's in this 10 to 20 years ahead of us right now. There's huge challenge, but there is huge opportunity, and thank you for all playing a part in helping us realise it. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Brett. Now, our panellists are going to take a walk over to the blue chairs. You are welcome to stand up and stretch. I might talk for a couple of minutes while you do that, but feel free to move around if you need a loo break. I'm not going to say anything important enough, apart from the fact that there's really good wine at the end, and I'm about to tell you the best wine to drink at night. No. Please go to the loo. Yeah. We'll wait till you get back. No bright lights, oh, not too bad. I'm going to sit over here. Yes. Yes, or you can do goodies. You can find him for it, but yeah, I'll pass it over. I'm going to perch on this stool. Oops, you're right. Go on through. How's that?
Oh, you grab yours. Oh, yeah. Grab yours. We can share, I'm sure we can share.
Okay, as the noise rises in the room, grab that energy, say what you need to say, and see you back in about 2 minutes.
I came here for about 3 or 4 years in 2003. Not moving.
Okay, you got your 1 minute countdown. Please, if you're thinking about asking a question, write it down and please do ask the question. You can either use Slido, we'll also go to the room for your hands in the air. Slido helps us because it tracks it and people can resonate with yours through a thumbs up. But if tech's not your thing, that's all right. We can all change. You can put your hand in. So when you ask your questions, you'll notice it's the same plenary session. David has done magic in the background and ensured that these questions are related to this conversation, so you can interact accordingly. Thank you, David. Okay, well, we're going to get cracking. People might come and take their seats as we get into the conversation. We have about 35 minutes. Less talk from me, or Andrew's going to give me a wave and say, stop talking, Cheryl, more for the panel. I would like to begin by reflecting on my own slight bias that I had during the conversations. Brett, coming into the disaster management sector from the sustainable development experiences that I've had, I often saw the blue and red flashing lights, and to me that was the disaster sector coming into it, you know, waving my head. That was me 7-8 years ago. And I came to realise that our sector, if you like, is before, during and after, you know, all the way through from the P and the P and the R and the R. If you knew, I should say prevention, preparedness, response and recovery, plus. There's lots of other words, but that helps. It's the whole continuum of what we call life and resilience. And in the presentations, we've had some questions relating to, you know, are we talking about crisis mode? Are we just talking about response? Are we talking about planning? Preparedness activities. And that was my bias through some of the conversations, Brett, and I had to stop and think, you know what, the examples that are being used by our panellists today are from their experiences, and we can join the dots ourselves from our own life experiences to take that to other end-use cases. So I ask in this session if you could try that stretch yourselves, if you're finding that challenging around the blue and red flashing lights versus the longer-term resilience conversation. It is one of those knowledge tool gaps that we have in our own sector that I think we need to call out. I'll stop talking, Andrew, and ask the panel the question. So I have one question, and then we're going to go to the green screen. And the start-off question, Sue, I'm going to pick you, and then I'll ask anyone else from the panel to comment accordingly. It relates to something that you brought up right in the beginning, Sue, around, and it was off the back of Brendan talking about being bold and thinking about what we can do different, that Andrew picked up on, and it is in the Be Ahead of Ready. In bold letters, it says be bold. So let's go with that. So Sue, from your experiences, how do you think we can encourage the two words, encourage and inspire people to think more boldly about what they can do in their workplace?
Well, I think part of the challenge with a lot of these AI and robotic technologies was illustrated when I asked if anyone had seen a robot on their way to the conference. And it's because you're not really getting a lot of exposure to the opportunities that are inherent in these technologies because you don't often get the opportunity to interact with them. And I think ChatGPT has been a really good example of an AI tool that is accessible, that people can experiment with. And I think that it is actually probably very difficult for us to rely on or think about use cases for the embedded forms of AI, like robotics, when you never get the opportunity to interact with one and get a sense of, apart from what you've seen in the movies, what they're actually capable of. Because I can tell you that from working in a robotics lab, you know, sometimes you're just grateful if it can do, you know, a couple of useful things. You often feel a bit sorry for them for being so incompetent. They certainly, you know, struggle opening doors or going up and down stairs. But having said that, that familiarity also allows you to see where the opportunities are, because they can be very capable and useful and do things differently to humans. And I think the crux of this is that robots and AI are not humans, and so you can use them to fill in gaps that perhaps they're good at, such as, you know, doing boring, mundane, repetitive tasks that other people don't want to do, or put them in dangerous situations where you don't want to put humans, and help to, you know, actually celebrate the differences that they have, rather than looking at them replicating exactly what humans do. And when you do that, then it gives you the opportunity to really examine the type of processes that you already have in place and what changes you need to make the best use of that technology. Because I think one of the other, and we were talking about this before the talk started. I mean, one of the challenges is that, you know, someone might have tried a robot 20 years ago and it didn't work, and so then they're never going to try one again. And you kind of need to start getting over that thinking, because you know, the technology is evolving so rapidly, and often we are putting it in a situation where it is not going to perform well, because you're expecting it to do and replace exactly what a human would do, and that is not where the strength in robotics and AI lies.
That's a bit of that disconnect point that we were talking about with Justin's presentation, where you mentioned the automated vehicle crashing into a truck because it didn't recognise the handover between those interfaces. Think of what you were talking about, Andy, with the space sector driving so many low-cost things that we can purchase at the newsagent today, ballpoint pens, you know, case in point. You're about to reflect, I suspect, on what Justin said.
Can you hear me? Yes. I was about to reflect and add to the great comments that were made here. From my perspective, and let's be frank, it's a failure of government. I don't think you can compare the mining companies with emergency services, because the mining companies are doing very well out of the resources that belong to this country. And they have some profits for investment, innovation, and actually they're doing a great job. And it is the mining companies that have given us such fantastic standard of living. I'm not sure about quality of life, but standard of living. I think emergency management services is a national infrastructure, and that's the role of governments, to invest in national infrastructure. I think it was the figure of $35 billion it costs in government relief after every year for disasters. Who pays for that? I think that a small fraction of that could modernize the emergency services sector. And the other problem, if I may say, ask yourselves, did we really respond very well to the COVID crisis? And that's an issue of states, in my view.
As you can see, we have a very frank panel. Please make sure you are asking your questions, because we also have the decision makers in the room. I just facilitate, but I'm looking at Andrew for some pointers, you know. I'm going to be a bit provocative and say that as an environmental engineer who's done a lot in the sustainable development agenda over the years, For me, our emergency management agencies include the local government development approval team. For me, the emergency management agency network includes the Department of Communities and Housing in their forward planning of affordable housing. So if we expanded our mindset to think of this emergency management agenda to include that, Andy, when I see satellites and the use of geospatial information to drive right place future planning, not housing developments that are affordable, that are in Western Southeast Queensland, that are in floodplains, or adjacent to state forests and national parks that we know are going to burn, I see an immense potential. Is that affordable for our local government authorities to buy that data? Is it an affordable conversation to be in this space of machine learning and AI around that context?
I think we're actually awash with data. It is affordable, but the appetite hasn't been, the attention has not been on that. Despite the great work of GA, as I've mentioned before, we can do a lot more with data. We can learn a lot more about how to apply analytics for planning of first of all, development, but also together with that for the kind of things that Brett said, where you would just simply grant a development application and you say, well, okay, just stick in a little bit of water and 2 days of food and you're fine. I really think that we should do better than that. And we can do better than that. And I don't believe it costs that much more. In fact, it'll be a fraction of the cost, in my view. And what is the cost of not doing it? We should always be considering that as well.
I'm looking at the other panellists to see whether you have Brett, and then I'm going to go to the audience. So have your technology ready.
If I may, just in terms of the planning conversation as well, the other challenge is this national inconsistency again between planning regulations here in South Australia versus New South Wales versus Victoria. And so from a developer perspective, I get their frustration in that when they build a Bunnings in Queensland, they build it to different rules than they do when they build a Bunnings in South Australia. Now, surely we can come up with some consistency to have those same rules, that same methodology for assessing bushfire risk, flood risk, the same rules around in energy efficiency and things like that could be applied across our country. And through that efficiency, we would find, and through that national consistency, we would find greater willingness to have some of these conversations and better solutions that could be available, because otherwise they are tailored site by site, development by development. And the way that they get around these things is by hijacking the word resilient and saying we're going to make this a more resilient building subdivision or commercial estate. We're going to put a levee around it. We're going to build that levee to the last flood, and that will be great. And of course, climate change comes along, overtops the flood, and that didn't work so well. But there's got to be ways we can do this smarter, because putting people's lives at risk for the sake of selling some land can't be sustainable.
Thank you, Brett. Right, interested live participation. Oh, yes, you can have my microphone.
I'm really interested. I'm Mel Taylor. I'm really interested in how we overcome the Mark I human being in all of this. We've got fantastic technology, but ultimately we have politicians, we have people with the hands in their purses that don't have perhaps the courage or the length of the political cycle to actually get through anything. And we're also very intolerant of failure, whether that's a satellite going out or, crashing into another satellite, whether it's a failure of the Tesla or the automation or the robot that doesn't work in the way that people have expected it to work. And I just wonder how we actually do really overcome that and become more courageous.
I don't think anyone celebrates failure, but certainly North America tolerates it. I don't believe we do. I think if you fail in business, if you fail as a startup, it's so difficult for you to dust yourself off and start again. in this country, I'm afraid.
So I was just going to say the conversation about the trust piece is amazing. You think of the number of accidents Teslas have had in autopilot mode, and it's statistically, it's actually not that many. You think of the fact that every single day in Australia, people kill themselves driving their own cars on the road, and we don't bat an eyelid as a society to that. And you know, just putting the fire service uniform still on, then my people have to go out and cut people out of cars that could be avoided through more automation. I don't think our generation are going to be able to solve that. I don't think you can re-educate them enough. But I do hope that the kids who are coming up through schools today, through investment in education, through STEM and things like that, that's how we'll be able to change that narrative and build that trust in technology, because it's going to take a while to get there is my view.
Thank you, Brett. I think we've helped to address Margaret's question there. I'm going to say it. If there's anything else you'd like to add, and then we'll pick another one. So Margaret had reflected, this afternoon seems crisis response oriented. Do panel members have examples of innovative preparation, recovery, resilience-focused uses of the tech being discussed? And I think we've covered a number of those examples there. Anything else that you'd like to reflect on?
I was reading the question, I'm sorry.
Yeah, that's right. Brett, did you want to say something? Right. So Margaret was discussing that crisis versus longer term thinking, and I think we have covered. People happy that we move on with that one? We might take another audience question which could build on that. We've got one over here and then over here to my right after, and we'll take another online, and that might bring us almost to time. So if you have something else urgent, get my attention.
Hi, it's Celeste Young here. I was thinking through, because we've worked a lot with innovation, that whole thing of how it can actually create a dependency that actually creates a greater vulnerability and novel risks. And what skills do we actually need within the emergency services that would help people manage that?
And may I say, when you say emergency services, I think that's another language opportunity we have in our bigger community of practice. I keep thinking emergency services includes our development application planner in local government. So that's where my head's stretching. So perhaps we can broaden it to say what skill sets do we need across that whole conversation space. Over to you, panel.
I think there has to be crossover between, you know, the people who understand the technology versus the people who really understand the domain. And, you know, where I've seen it work very well is actually where the domain has absorbed some of those technology people. So
Sue, what do you mean by domain there? When you talk about technology in a domain?
Emergency management as opposed to mining or,
great.
Forestry. But I think on the other side of things, there are a lot of opportunities for people within emergency management to get more familiar with these technologies. And, you know, Australia is quite a curious place in that we are very quick to take on board technology in our personal lives, but very risk averse in terms of taking it on board in our organisations. And, you know, in some ways this is probably going to be forced upon us a little bit. But I think that artificial intelligence in some ways is also going to be quite a force multiplier in terms of the opportunities to pick up new skills. If you haven't had the opportunity to use ChatGPT, you can actually ask it to be a coach. And, you know, you can experiment with it. You know, I got it to help me learn a particular programming language in an hour and a half, which probably, if I'd been left to my own devices, having to figure it out for myself might have taken a couple of days. You know, I think that we have to probably also be thinking quite innovatively about the mechanisms by which we can give people new skills as well. But also I think that is something that is worth actually mapping out and thinking about what those skills of the future are going to be like and what opportunities you're going to present people in the emergency management space to start to acquire those skills. And that's probably a conversation that should happen sooner rather than later.
If I may too, I think, so first of all, we have amazing people in emergency services who are really interested in pushing the boundaries, and often those fiscal restraints are what hold them back. But the other thing is, and this is some of the great work that NHRA are doing about looking at what is the end user for the research to make sure that the research being done is going to be operational. and be able to be used. And that is a huge force multiplier, because we don't need to have the solution. I just need to be able to say, here's my problems, please someone solve them. And some of the worst pitches that have come to our agency that I've been involved in are those where they have very impressive slide decks and wonderful, great credentialed people, and they're trying to pitch to us that they've solved a problem that isn't even a problem that we've got. And so please come talk to us if you have a real passion to help in this industry. Talk to us about what our challenges are. We'll lay them out. We know what they are. And if we didn't, we have royal commissions and reports up the wazoo that identify them. So please talk to us and help us be part of the ideation process.
I just want to echo exactly what was said by the panelists. It's about education, about each other's needs and capabilities, and organizations such as yours, and indeed the CRC program and others, provide an opportunity then for the researchers with the great inventions. I don't know if you know, but we are, apart from the US and UK, we have the most universities in the top 100. That's not bad. So we are great inventors, bad innovators. And I think it's because the incentives haven't been there for the academics to get out of the lab and connect with industry, connect with the end users. And these type of events are a fantastic exemplar, and we need to be doing more of that.
Well, thank you, Andy. Point taken personally as well. We have a question from the floor.
Yeah, I just want to ask,
I know most people know you, but if you could just say your name for the onliners as well.
I just want to ask
Sorry, I didn't make that. Is it possible to share who you are, just so that we can...
I'm David Bowman.
Thank you, David.
And I live in the real world, I suppose. And so I'm going to make a rude comment about technology. And let's say, OK, you win. The allure of technology. Awesome. What's the stopping rule and the end point? Where does this... Is this a techno-utopian nanny state that you do it all for us now? Is that what you're selling? And if you're not selling it, when do you stop with your technology? And when do the people take over?
So, who would like to...
I wonder if the Romans asked the same question. or the Egyptians, when they invented fire and wheels and whatever else they do. I think progress is progress. I don't believe... We are made for progress. Humans are never satisfied with what they have. We are made for progress. Where is the end point? That is such a philosophical question, and it's not rude. I think it's a great question to be asking, particularly now, because in the past we've developed tools that they could do things, they could augment what we do, but they couldn't think for themselves. You saw the brilliant presentation by Sue, what AI will do. And general artificial intelligence eventually might come close. So what is the end game is actually a very good question. Thank you for asking it.
I appreciate that probably from the presentations that were given that it would seem that it was all about the technology, but we only had 15 minutes to cover a fair bit of space, but really it's actually all about the people. Technology is just a tool. And so, and people won't take on board technology if they are not finding it useful in some way. And so really what we were challenged to do was to illustrate where that technology is heading and to challenge people to think about what that might mean in their own context and how you could potentially take advantage of it. Now, it's everybody's individual choice whether they, take advantage of technology or not. There's no rule that says that you have to, but I think that if you are prepared to, consider the ways that it might make it easier for you to do your work or to keep people safe. I mean, for example, in mining, there is a deliberate decision to be able to use machines in place of people so that we're not putting people in harm's way. When I first started working for a copper mining company, I was quite shocked to discover how many people, hundreds of people, we still send underground every day. Now, that is in an environment where we really shouldn't be sending people at all. If we can find ways to leverage technology to be able to do the job that needs to be done without putting people at risk, then to me that is a good use of the clever technologies that people are coming up with. But, you know, I guess everyone's going to have their own different motivations for why you might want to apply technology. But to your point, really, it's not about the technology, it's about people. And it's about people's willingness to adopt the technology and what the technology can do to support people. But without, you know, people are at the centre of all of this, then it's not technology at the centre. Technology is just on the periphery.
To quote The Simpsons, I for one welcome our new robot overlords. No, look.
And you got that quote right.
I think that the reality is in dynamic industries like emergency management, a lot of what we're talking about will be decision support tools. And when we get held to a really high account because the community has such high expectations of emergency management to help them in their time of need, as per my last slide that I finished with, having those decision support tools, being able to make evidence-based decisions are what the community want us to be doing. So I see it having real merit in that. But if we can get to a point that I don't have to worry about a crew of 6 firefighters going out there in a fire truck and either being killed on the way to the incident, on the way back to the incident, or at the incident, I look forward to that, because that will be an incredible day. And yes, we'll have a lot of frustrated, bored volunteers around the place who won't be able to go out and do that anymore. But the reality is we'll find other ways to occupy our time, and we'll be quite happy, because that risk people take, as per the mining example, is extreme. And it's not a pleasant piece when we lose some of our people.
Thank you so much, panel. We have 5 minutes to go, and I just wanted to acknowledge the range of questions and the votes that are on the wall there. And I'm relieved, because this is day 1. And the online delegates, well, please come next time in person, if at all possible, and completely understand their circumstances, including greenhouse gas emissions, as to why you would dial in online. Really grateful to NHRA for providing that hybrid opportunity. These are the kinds of questions that we can continue over the next few days here, and also for our onliners, feel free to connect virtually through all of your social media outlets to engage with the NHRA team on the questions. John, you're another one for great quotes. Open the pod bay door, Hal. I'm sorry, Dave, I can't do that. The issue of governance arrangements, that is part of the topic of conversation over the next couple of days, well and truly. Beyond technology, the opportunities, that's the whole point of this session, was to seed the divergent thought of technology into your brains. I didn't tell you at the beginning, but my study was in behaviour change as an engineer. Makes me pretty dangerous, and I make sure I always have a person who actually has expertise in psychology around me when I have conversations that matter. But it does intrigue me that we have a way of engaging with a divergent conversation on day 1, and then you can go home and sleep, or to your accommodation, and come back on day 2 with some seed thoughts that you'll carry through the next few days. Please, if something happens in this computer over the next couple of days and something clicks for you, I'd love to hear at a personal level, and I suspect in my incoming role in NHRA it would be good for me to say that. So please come and let me know as you get those, what we would call aha moments. And it's a little bit of learning and teaching, capacity building theory called threshold learning theory. And some of you might have popped already and gone, aha, and had that moment. Others, it might be after you sail back home or fly back home or whatever it may be. Can I take this opportunity to thank our panel for their energy, commitment to the conversation, and time that they have taken in crafting a 15-minute provocation for you today from each of their fields of experience that will poke at your brain cells to have you think differently, perhaps, over these next few days. Can you join with me, please, in thanking the panel? So I now need to also acknowledge our illustrator who has been hard at work all day. And I'm so sorry that's the only thing between us and drinks. It is going to be a welcome segue into drinks. So for a couple of minutes, I'll pass over for our illustrated summary of today's conversation. I can't wait to see what it looks like.
Thank God that wasn't the clapsticks. Are these working? Alrighty. Thank you guys. Hello, I am Dana Heyman, your graphic recorder. I have spent the day listening, and I will spend the next couple of days continuing to listen to the great conversation and presentations. So as you can see, I've just got a little video recording to give you a bit of a sense of how these artworks come to life. But it is really the visual capture of today. This will continue to grow over several posters and things like that. So just to give us a bit of a recap of where we are, we started with a great welcome to country from Cliffy Wilson and our opening speeches from our various great esteemed panel members and welcoming speeches. And Cliffy really did share with us some great language and really invited us onto country through giving us the scent of the ancestors so that they can guide us. We had some really great call-outs, particularly about the centre and how research is, the centre is really focusing on using the research for impact and translating that into various ways, and how research really equips our decision makers and from various different levels across the place to make decisions when facing uncertainty, which is really difficult when, as we've heard today, with the change of the climate, the challenges faced, the technology that's changing, and all the opportunities that we can hopefully begin to leverage now. So then we went into our keynotes, which was essentially 4 keynotes in one, I will admit. And they gave us some great thinking and ideas around the new technologies that's coming out, really challenging us to think about robots and AI and, you know, the large language models that sit underneath them, and how these are really becoming technologies that really focus on predicting the future quite accurately. We heard how space tech is been fundamental to our technology growth and will continue to be a place that we can look to inspire ourselves within this sector. Now, I'm really right at the end here at the purple with our fire response from our lovely CFA officer. So I will continue to progress this evening and finish this up. But hopefully this really excites you, that, you know, there's a great visual capture from today that I will encourage you to, you know, come talk to me, contribute to, and then hopefully share wider post this event. But yes, I'm looking forward to it, and good luck over the next 3 days. And yeah, thank you.
Thank you, everybody, especially to our esteemed panellists there this afternoon. That's going to bring today's proceedings to a close. We've now got drinks, so from 5:30 till 7 o'clock this evening. We are back here tomorrow at 9 a.m. Tomorrow's program really features a lot of the research going on. We've been a little bit tech heavy today, but we've got a lot of social science and other forms of science throughout the program, and obviously finishing off with our urban policy and social policy panel at the end on day 3. A couple of other announcements. Somebody's left their tablet behind. If you're missing a tablet, go see Vaya out the front there as well. So 9 o'clock, back here. We're in the streams tomorrow as well. So if you're at home or over dinner tonight and you're looking, plan ahead, figure out what streams you want to get to in the morning. Again, tonight, great opportunity to introduce yourselves to new people that you've never met before. Relationships, collaboration is key. And we often get the feedback that the drinks are just as important as everything else in the program. So enjoy.